Okay, good evening. Are we ready on the internet? Sorry. Yeah, okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call to order the public hearing for the 22-23 budget. Will the secretary please call the roll?
7:01 PM. Polly.
Here.
Rose.
Here.
Carl.
Here.
Kitzke.
Here.
Gallegos. Figurehead here. Pelletier.
Here.
Okay. Questions and answers on the adoption of the fiscal year 23 budget.
Good evening. So the public hearing is an opportunity for the community to ask questions and provide input. So having opened the hearing, I guess we give the opportunity for the community to provide their input.
If there's anyone who'd like to make comments on the fiscal year 23 budget draft, please click the icon on the bottom of the screen. No one? Seeing no one, we will continue then.
Well, this is actually a summary of what we're going to go through later for our budget. The major changes that have occurred between the last time the board was provided the budget to this time, there were basically three of them. One was to increase salaries and benefits for recommended increases that will be coming to the board. Additionally, we increased revenue to account for the fact that we are seeing increased interest rates. And we also increased revenue by $125,000 in the general state aid to account for anticipated increases there. Those are the three major changes. As we're looking at our 30,000-foot view, we take a look at the fact that our expenses and our revenue, again, are two major sources. Our major source of expenditures and our major source of revenue are in line with each other for the most part. And as we look forward and look to FY24, we're going to look to maintain that alignment. So at a later time, we'll be asking for you to adopt the FY23 budget. Thank you.
Thank you, T. Okay, I move that we adjourn the fiscal year 23 public hearing for the budget.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Polly.
Aye.
Kitzke.
Aye.
Carl.
Aye.
Figurehead. Aye. Pelletier.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
And Gallegos is absent.
Okay, at 7:03 PM, I'd like to call to order the Mundelein Elementary School District 75 Board of Education meeting for Tuesday, June 21st, 2022. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Polly.
Here.
Rose.
Here.
Carl.
Here.
Kitzke.
Here.
Gallegos is absent. Figurehead here. Pelletier.
Here.
Okay, first order item on the agenda, as usual, is the citizens' comments. If there's any citizens that would like to make comments to the board at this time, please click on the icon at the bottom of the screen. Okay, seeing that no one has done that, we will move to the second item, which is the Board of Education comments. Anyone have anything for the good of the group? No? Okay, we're good. All right, moving on. Next is the district starting hard reports, and the first one we'll hear is the business office. Is T here?
Yeah, on my way out.
Sorry, T.
Thank you. Again, while you're looking at your budget, if you look at page 1, it looks as though we are going to have about a $2 million deficit, but keep in mind that's across all funds, and that includes our construction, which is actually creating the deficit. If you look at page 2, it shows that we have an operating surplus projected of $20,000. So we're coming to the board with, I believe, the 7th consecutive balanced budget, and we're asking for adoption of the FY23 budget. Any questions?
Maybe a point of clarification, T. Can you share why it's considered a balanced budget? Even though we show the operational side.
Yes. So the reason that it's considered a balanced budget, even though as a whole we have a deficit, is because oftentimes for things like bonds and construction, you receive your money in a different time period than you spend it. So in other words, you get your loan to build your house before you build it, and then you pay your vendors. So the state understands that for those certain funds, you're gonna receive it in a different time period. So they do not look at those funds when they're determining whether or not we have a balanced budget. The rest of the funds that we call operating funds are those funds that it really takes to operate the district on a day-to-day, what it costs to educate the kids. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
And I believe that I'm next on the agenda. So we have three positions that we're recommending to the Board of Education. We'll be discussing cost savings with those positions at a later time during our joint discussion of our goals for FY23. We're asking for a commercial electrician that we will share between District 120 and District 75. We are asking for a receptionist at the District Office East, as well as an executive assistant for the Chief of Staff at the District Office West. Those three positions will be again shared with District 120, and those will be, the details of those positions will be discussed at our later presentation. Do you have any questions outside of that vague description?
Well, with the assumption that we'll hear about it later.
Correct. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is teaching and learning.
The first thing on there is the consolidated district plan, and unlike the way it sounds, it does not mean we're consolidating with another district. It just means that it is a process in which all of the grant applications are funneled through this primary document. So it's the initial proposal that we provide to the state that says, we know that we're receiving Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, ESSER II, ESSER III, and IDEA, and the Preschool for All grant. And this is how we're going to use all of those grants and how they work together and separately from each other. This is something that we just refresh the state what our goals are and what our intentions are, and remind them that we are working and being diligent with the funds that we receive from the government. Questions on that one? Okay, so once the consolidated grant or the CDP is approved by the board, then we can move forward and apply for the individual grants after that. So the grant funding cycle starts on July 1st and runs the calendar year after that. We've been applying for extended school year. So if you apply for regular school year, the funds would end at the end of June. But by applying for extended school year, we can actually use the funds through August, which allows us a little bit more flexibility for our summer professional development and any additional work projects we have going on with the funding. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
School calendar. Oh, school calendar. So the school calendar needed to be adjusted slightly for the non-attendance day in November. And then we recounted all of the school attendance days to be in accordance with our contract with the teachers. And so there needed to be 174 days of student interaction days, instructional days. And so the change in the calendar accounts for making sure we have 174 instructional days and the extra non-attendance day as per the new state guidelines. Other than that, we tried to leave it as close to the same as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, board members. Tonight's meeting, the priority for us is to end with a summary of what we said we would do back last July. So what you'll hear tonight is the same format that took place last July, what we did mid-year, where all of our departments were able to come together, and we did this jointly with District 120, where all the departments got to talk about where we were with those goals, where they're combined. On the academic portions, where we were not consistent, where we're sharing our data, we did that independently. What I'm proud of is how we worked together as a team this year. We're following through on what we said we do for you as a board to hopefully help keep you informed of where we are in all of our departments. And then for us, it's a structure really of what we want to be able to do going forward. And communicating from me to you, I think one of the critical parts, what I'd ask you to be able to take away, and what you'll see in this is, we've identified what we think we want to be able to start doing going forward for next year and our goals. Next month, you have your strategic planning with the School Board Association. So I think using this document, you can be able to use that information from this past year and see where the goals are for next year, and talking with them next month to help you decide kind of what direction you would like to see us go overall as a board. So to me, that's an important piece of information because it makes sure that we're all in alignment. As far as the work from our staff and everybody that you're going to hear from tonight, I'm really proud of them. Many of you have been in the spot. We've all been going through the last 2 years, and we've done a lot of work, and you as a board have been very supportive of the work that we've been doing with the literacy, working through the SEL components for our students, brought a lot of new staff on, a lot of new training. And that's not always the easiest to do during what I'd say is what circumstances we're used to pre-pandemic. And we did an outstanding job getting a lot of new systems put in place, starting a lot of new learning for us as adults, which can be just as challenging as trying to teach our little ones on how to read and write. And I think we've come through with flying colors because we are definitely on the path of being able to meet the goals that we've set out to do. And what you'll see tonight is we're in progress. I think we set some very lofty goals, and I think we rightfully so should, because we need to stretch ourselves. What you'll see tonight is we've worked very hard. We came close in a number of areas, but it's not where we need to be. And I think I can speak for my team and tell you, we're not satisfied with where we're at. And I think there's a fire that burns within all of our staff and all of our buildings that we know we want to do better and help our kids achieve even more. So that's what you should be hearing from tonight as you go through these reports. And as a board, I hope when you leave here tonight, people ask you how we're doing as a school district. There are a number of highlights that you'll be able to share with our community about what we're able to provide for services for their students. Okay. And to lead us off, I think you've seen her once or twice before already tonight. I'm gonna ask Tina to come on out and lead us out with the business office.
In charge of these sitting arrangements to you.
I should have come. Good evening. Tonight, we're going to discuss first and foremost kind of where we've ended the year in terms of our prior goals and some of the achievements we've received. So if we're taking a look at one of our goals, which was to challenge those traditional methods of thinking, some examples of how we achieved that goal, I would say our MIA negotiations and our alternative pay structure that we worked out throughout that contract. Also, our school violence prevention program grant. Prior to us kind of taking that initiative and applying for it ourselves, we received about $50,000. We're going to talk about it again in a few slides, but we received $400,000 by applying on our own and looking at what our district needed as a whole. So again, very excited about challenging those traditional methods of thinking. We go to the next slide. So how are we promoting responsible resource allocation through our long-range financial plan and serving as that source of accurate information? Well, we provide you an accurate treasurer's report each month, but we also have provided an ACFR. This is a new acronym. Before it was CAFR. Now it's ACFR, Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, which took our annual financial report and gave it a lot more depth for those people who want to dig deep and look at the history of the district. And we'll eventually provide 10 years of solid data for individuals to be able to look at the district as a whole. We also, as a result of that, received 2 awards for that report, and that would be our Excellence in Financial Reporting from the GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association, as well as the Association of School Business Officials. As we look at our goal, which was to realize a minimum of $2,000 per Medicaid eligible student, and that goal was a lofty one, we were unable to hire the individual. And given the fact that a couple months ago, I went to a conference where they notified us that the 18-month window, which you can go back and claim 18 months of prior claims, that window is going away. So each month it's down to 17, then 16 months, then 15. So realizing that we hadn't been able to hire an individual, we actually sought out one of the best in McHenry County, who's going to come She is going to look at both District 120 and District 75 and get us up to date and ready to go with those Medicaid claims. Then she's also agreed to train whoever we have on staff for a Medicaid person at that time as well. So we're very excited about that. As we're looking at our measurables from last year, we said we would apply for and receive at least one competitive grant. Well, we do have that $400,000 federal grant for our school violence prevention grant, but it's also important to recognize those other departments that aren't financed that sought out their own grants, and the special education and curriculum departments sought out some Jumpstart and the Jumpstart Kindergarten Program grant, as well as a few others. And I just really want to thank them for their efforts in helping us achieve this goal as well. We head to the next slide. So what are we going to do for FY 22-23? Our focus is going to be a return to customer service. We are going to focus on, a lot of times as the business department, we may think, well, our customers are the parents. Well, actually, our customers are our principals and our teachers, because they're the ones that interact with us. And it's important to realize that they're our customers and we're not their customers. So we're going to take a focus back on customer service and make sure that we're meeting everyone's needs. We go to part 2, which is the next slide. This is the secondary part that we're going to take a deep look into the department as a whole. We're going to look at restructuring the department and making sure that not only the positions fit the people, but we have proper cross training and we also have proper separation of duties. So for example, you don't want the same person taking in deposits who's recording the deposits, because that person can keep the money and forget to record that portion of the deposit. So you just have various checks and balances. So we're going to be doing that as well, looking into FY 23. As we focus on our measurables for next year, and we do conduct those surveys, we're going to look at customer satisfaction as a whole. We're going to also look at customer effort. How much effort does it take for the people to get what they want from us? And then finally, what is our first response time? So are we reaching out to them immediately, not just a canned response, but trying to reach out to them personally and at least letting them know that we're going to address their needs. So those are the measurables that we'll be looking at for FY 23. And I believe, if we go to the next slide, next up is buildings and grounds.
Thank you, T. Welcome, board. Welcome, Emily. I'm here to discuss the goals that we put into place back in July of last year. Give some midterm goals if we have, and then how we have completed them. The first goal was establishing a shared EPA HVAC position. Recognize the savings about $130,000 for the year. Midpoint in January, the HVAC gentleman we hired, we did 17 projects, 35 labor hours, completed in-house by October of 21. Recognize the savings about $6,000 and about $500 in vendor fees. As of now, July of 22, we have 45 mechanical service projects in there, 136 labor hours completed in-house, approximately 48,000 outsourced costs, materials at about 2,500 on markup fees. As a joint service working with Kevin Quinn, the total savings was $181,000 between the two districts and $6,300 in markups on material that we've had to buy that Ben was able to get at a better price. So we've succeeded our goal of $120,000 by about $60,000. My second goal was we were looking into sealing the parking lots. And back in October, I showed you guys pictures of all of our parking lots that got sealed. We are working with the high school. Now they are going to start their projects after they get their parking lots and their concrete repaired. So by mid-July, early August, we will start their parking lots. My third goal was aligning the custodial services. We just signed the contract today to align the custodial services with 120. We are going to go farther into that in July because we only signed a one-year contract, and we're going to pull District 76 in. In the process, conversations with vendor through the savings of economical scales. July's update is ongoing conversations with vendors brought D76 into the discussion, so it's now D76, 75, and 120. We are working together on buying our commodities and our consumables with a savings of about $12,000. We thought we'd be making a little bit more, but because of inflation, we're not going to be saving as much, but we should do better on that in one more year. Goals for next year. I only put one goal in. Anna, next screen, please. I only put one goal in. That's to establish, as T already mentioned, an in-house electrician. Reduce our outsourced electrical service costs. This year alone, we spent $126,000 on outsourcing electrical work. If we bring someone in, we'd have about an $80,000 savings. One project that I put on here is installing new LED lights throughout all the classrooms and all the hallways. That's going to be a 3 to 5 year project. But outsourcing cost is about $200,000. We could do it in-house for about half of that and save about $100,000. We're going to continue exploring maintenance synergies. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you very much.
I get tasked with making HR exciting. Regardless of where you work, there are going to be 7 steps, I guess, you're going to take as an employee that are going to define your experience. That starts with recruitment and hiring and carries all the way through to eventually you retire, or resign, or you have to be separated from employment. From an employee point of view, this is all very linear and orderly. They have a certain expectation of what they think their experience with an HR function would be, because their primary role is to teach or assist students or something else. So using this as the framework on the next slide, this is what it looks like when you take a look behind the curtain. You know, we obviously have a big emphasis on the search, selection, and onboarding process. Wow, that converted very funky, didn't it? I apologize for that. But most of our time is going to be spent in the daily events and annual processes, step 4 and 5, and providing service to the employees, then with a little bit on the end. And where this can become a challenge is that we're not just trying to do this for one person, we're trying to do it for 150 who are going to be maybe in several of these bubbles at the same time. And then you throw in you know, a pandemic or some other things, and it can stretch the HR function pretty thin, so that we get back down to the essentials, and we haven't had the capacity really to add or expand some of these things. So last year, I had 3 goals. The first was to improve efficiencies and accuracy with our payroll process. And the way that we wanted to evaluate that is determine, does our current system meet our current needs? In an optimal environment, it does. But we've not been working in an optimal environment due to COVID leave days or maintaining vaccination versus unvaccinated status. Some of those complexities force some human error. And so we wanted to see, does switching to a new system address those needs? Or are there better ways that we can address that with the current system we have? Is there add-ons or additions that we can make to SDS? Is there a change in the alignment and how our payroll coordinator is communicating with building principals to get extra pay timesheets? So we took a look at that, and we decided that at this time it doesn't really serve a purpose except incur an exorbitant cost to the district to jump on one of these new luxury payroll systems. We think that we can do better with the process that we have and manage the process that we have than go with something brand new. The second piece was to create a robust onboarding process. And that we were able to accomplish. Tina Rutledge has done a wonderful job in bringing the new employees along and meeting with every new employee. It's not just the background checks and the compliance pieces. It's making sure that they're making informed decisions when signing up for the insurance program that fits their family's needs the best. It's making sure that they're able to come back to her that first month as they're trying to figure things out. We've been able to improve and formalize that process quite well. And then the third goal was to create a confidential sick bank. And the primary need for that is when staff are becoming ill or needing to quarantine from COVID or COVID-like symptoms early in the pandemic, was chewing into personal time, sick time rapidly. And that was a concern for staff. That was mitigated at the beginning of the year when the state legislature passed legislation granting COVID leave days, unlimited COVID leave days to vaccinated staff. So that was a great source of assistance. But that is something that we didn't fully pursue and will be a new goal for this year. On the next slide. So what I'm sharing with you here is an effort to kind of realign the HR workflow chart. So if you were to agree to hire an executive assistant for human resources, the way I envision this role functioning is as a front of house person to funnel inquiries. What's very common right now is, be it a question about taking a leave, FMLA, COVID, payroll, or whatever, it'll be Shane and Kim Aradia. I'm not sure who this question goes to, so I'm just going to ask both of you at the same time. Or Shane and Tina, I'm not sure what to do about this, or they'll include a building principal. And so now you have a four-way conversation that, depending upon when we can check our email, one of us might be catching up late, and I'm seeing heads nod behind you. It creates a lot of work because people don't really know where to start, so they shotgun it out. This position would be able to serve as front of house for that one-stop shop. If it's basic COVID questions, if it's how to navigate the HR website, if it's a question about payroll, that person would have the skill to be able to triage the question and then funnel it to the appropriate resource for that. Additionally, this role would greatly be able to assist both HR coordinators and payroll coordinator in doing some of the work that is very tedious and time consuming for them. So we'll use the payroll coordinator as an example. The verification of extra duties or overtime, that is largely a manual process to verify. And so with our payroll coordinator doing that and trying to time that so that things get on payroll, giving her the bandwidth to be able to concentrate on the payroll piece and giving somebody else the opportunity to speak with the building principals or to contact the employee if there's something ambiguous, be of great assistance. Additionally, this human resources executive assistant would be able to help with a lot of our compliance pieces. I know this is not a foreign term for this board, but unfunded mandates. Every time press comes out, there's more legal stuff. And so that would help me not only be able to figure out how we have to react to some of these things, but this person could be the one to provide follow-ups for doing your annual compliance training, not having to track somebody down. There's just, it gives us a little bit of breathing room to be able to get through our day-to-day pieces, to do our essential functions better and more efficient, and then give us the bandwidth that I'll speak to here in a little bit. So Anna, if you want to go to the next slide. So if everybody's doing that, what am I spending my time on? Well, again, with an employee coming in with an expectation of things being easy and efficient, that's kind of where it's all going to begin. And so I don't expect someone to be an expert on FMLA. They know that they're going to be having a child. It may be their first child. They're scared to death and they don't know what to do, and they don't know what forms they need to take to their doctor. And if they worked at a previous district, maybe, or they worked at it in the private sector, maybe those forms were burdensome. How can we distill a lot of these things down to the most essential parts so the burden shifts to me or the HR function and not the employee themselves? Additionally, we should have some processes that are standardized. And this, we have a lot of it based on board policy. If you're having an issue with a colleague or something, you know the process that you go to if you want to file a grievance or follow the contract. But there's a lot of gray in what we do, and the gray piece is what it takes up the most amount of time. So An area of focus will be on the search and selection processes, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. But that should be a paint by numbers process for anybody going through it the first time, be it a building principal, being anybody in the back of the room here. They've gone through it before, but if you're new, what do we expect? Who should be on a search committee? How many members should be on that search committee? Is it okay to have maybe somebody in a clerical function on a search committee? Those are questions we hear often. So to provide that capacity and provide that training so that once you do the process, you know what the process is, and you just have to, it's pure repetition after that. The next piece is the largest piece. Everything has a regulation, statute, or policy associated with it. The school law is like the universe, it is expanding. And I don't know everything. And so I serve as a liaison to our outside attorneys to ask for help, or what do I do with this, or how to troubleshoot, or sometimes just cut the middleman out of it completely and have them talk directly to a building principal to see if something is new or different or changed. And because of the nature of the work, I'm often have a front seat when a concern comes into the district, because maybe the person who's sharing their frustration, be it a parent or a community member, they may not be saying the right words, but maybe they're alleging racial harassment for their student, or maybe they feel that the district is not being appropriately handling it, or they've talked to somebody previously and they haven't had a satisfactory response, and they're going to go above everybody's head and try to go to Kevin, and it's not a good use of Kevin's time when they can come to me. So I handle a lot of that. And the next one, communicate health and safety protocols. That's relaxing a little bit, but I can tell you that later tonight I will be responding to a staff member that just emailed with COVID with the new guidelines. So that's still something that's omnipresent. I hope monkeypox doesn't become a thing, but if it does, we've got a pretty good template for how to communicate that. And then the last piece is to identify new and revise the necessary talent acquisition resources. Since I've been employed by the district, the rules have changed a little bit. It used to be that if you're looking for a teacher, you have a vacancy, you put it on your website, you put it on the ROE website, maybe you put it on a couple teacher-specific job boards, and you would get candidates. But now with the teacher shortage, now with there being enhanced competition for non-academic roles in terms of pay, now it's a free-for-all. So we are putting job vacancy postings on Indeed, where that was for more traditional business roles. Now, if there's a resource that you're seeing is getting a substantial amount of web traffic, or you're starting to find people, at least hits, people that would view the vacancy or apply, you go there. And it takes some finesse. Social media, now we're having Peter post our vacancies out through our social media feeds, because that creates word of mouth in the community. Mundelein Moms, for all of its benefits or detriments, that creates word of mouth. And so we need to be aggressive in continuing to push those resources to find a talent. And there are new ones coming on every day. Some of them aren't worth the money, but some of them are, and trying to figure out where our money's best spent. And then on to the last slide. So the three goals that I have for this year is, the first is to expand HR capacity. There are a lot of functions that are traditional HR functions that have bled into the buildings, the principal's roles, maybe the nurse's role. An easy example of this is staff emergency contact information. Right now, that's being housed and managed by the nurses. And the nurses have been strained with all of their responsibilities. So having that come back to HR so that we can collect that data, solicit staff to complete that data, house it in a Google Drive, so then if there is a medical emergency, that the nurses know where to look, rather than having to go through their file to pull a piece of paper. But that's an example of a function that could come back. The updating or creating of staff policies or handbooks. That is something that has been done at the building level at 120. that can come back to HR. That's something that we can do. So it gives us the ability to take some of the burden off of other units and manage that ourselves. The second piece is to improve the feedback structure. So we already do exit interviews. We had 17 certified staff members turn over since the beginning of the year so far. We've conducted exit interviews. I can tell you why everybody left. Some are unavoidable. Some 4 moved out of state due to a spouse having a job relocation or them just wanting a different climate. So we do good with that, but what we're not so good at is catching them before they get to the stage where they're exiting. So there's things called stay interviews, where you solicit feedback from staff that are coming back the following year. Why are you staying at Mundelein? Is it the culture? Is it the pay? Do you have kids in the district? Is it a little bit of both? Just again, to pull more data points to get a sense of what are our strengths or what could be emerging weaknesses that we should address. And then the last piece is the first year check-ins. We have a new staff member who comes on. After that first year, what went well? What didn't go well? What did you have to figure out for yourself? What was great at people helping you to do? Again, to figure out where we can reinforce some of those pieces. And then the last piece is ramp up marketing and recruitment. And I'm not necessarily referring to posting jobs on websites. We have a unique community. We have a unique district with our own personality and things. A part of this is I don't know how good we are at marketing our community and with ourselves. The reason I put this on here is a goal at the other board meeting. Before the board meeting started, Peter Restrelli was talking about going to the baseball game in Joliet, and my wife and my son went. And they said, what was interesting is there's a lot of, like, you could tell who was from Mundelein because they were wearing red, but there's not all the M's. And coming out of a college environment where you're just overwhelmed with the Jayhawk, or you're overwhelmed with, Chief Illiniwek or whatever. I think that, and I'm not just talking about gear, but I'm talking about advertising what makes us unique, what our strengths are, because the new generation of employees aren't just chasing paychecks. They want a work-life balance. They want to be able to live in an area that accommodates or meets their interests. And I think that we are able to provide a little bit of all of that. For me, when I came to interview, I flew into O'Hare, I got on the interstate. I was 10 minutes on the interstate. I'm like, oh, hell no, I'm not coming here. I am not. I thought that was going to be my commute. I'd never been north of Army Trail Road before. And I just, and so I'm like, nope, I'm going to have to take the interstate. I'm going to be listening to the traffic update. That's not for me. Well, then I was able to get out here, and I'm from a rural area, and I live in a rural area, and I drive through a golf course and a forest preserve on the way to work, and that hit my comfort zone. But if you're somebody that wants more of an urban experience, you can live the same distance I live from the high school and live in a completely different population. And so trying to find ways to market not just the job, but the environment, the lifestyle, the holistic experience that you might have if you come work at Mundelein, I think could be special, and I think it's worth exploring. So that's my spiel. Yes.
Okay, could you give it, you talked about the staff moving out of state. Could you give us an idea about why some of the other people left? the
Sure.
district?
In speaking in generalities, we had a couple that left the education field altogether. For whatever reason, they wanted a pivot. We had a couple that, I say a couple, we had, I believe, 5 that identified. They can fill out a form and then speak with team, and normally it's a combination of both. There were a couple that cited that they were frustrated with the direction the school was going, or sorry, the district was going in terms of the curriculum pivot. They had very strong feelings about that, and it didn't suit them, and so they identified that. We didn't have a lot, when I say a lot, we only had 2 that identified salary as that, but that was not the primary reason that they left. The salary was related more to the physical distance in which they had to drive. They were able to find a new employer in the district that was either physically closer to where they lived or where their kids were going to school, without getting into too much depth, I believe one of them might have been having two different households and some things there. But we do manage that. And actually, Tina does give me an executive summary every year about, why our staff have left. There's much more movement with the paraprofessionals. And so we're not as aware as often with them, but there wasn't any consistent theme or anything that stood out like, oh my gosh, we've got a liability that we have to address. It just looked like a combination of life choices. And we did take some feedback. Some people provided a lot of detail. And so Tina and I talked about how we can maybe incorporate that in one of them, just like, how was your experience? It didn't like, not why are you leaving, but what, when you were here, what was it like? And one of the feedback was like, I didn't know who to go to. Like, I knew for certain things I need to go to my building principal, but with other stuff, I just wasn't sure. And it would be like a comment card. It would be helpful if that could be streamlined and communicated.
Thank you.
I think, the first two goals definitely are great, and relieve some of the pressure off of different people. But I do think goal number 3 is, we've worked for a long time to improve the image of Mundelein overall for people to move into the community, to have their kids go to the school. But I think it's really important as far as what we attract, teaching wise and staff wise, to do that. Granted, we still have work to do on the other side, getting people to move here, because I now, where I used to not hear many good things about people wanting to move to Mundelein, I hear a lot more positives. But I have heard of a couple of teachers that I've informed that there's openings in this district or in the high school district, and it was, that's kind of far, and I think if we could do something to improve that somehow, it would be great. Just absolutely great.
I think this is number 3, follow up on what you're talking about.
Mhm.
I mean, that's kind of what we've been talking about too. What are we as a board doing to let the community know what's happening in the district and how are we encouraging their feedback? And I think that's consistent with what we're trying to do in the
Right.
direction we're starting to move in.
Mhm.
Not only as a board, but it's the district as a whole. I think that's really, really good.
Okay, anything else for Shane? Thank you. Laura?
Hi, so you've heard so far tonight a lot of the process goals that some of the departments have done, and you'll hear more about some of the process goals from the buildings. And we're super proud of all the accomplishments we made this year, but I always like to make a health analogy because I think it's something that everyone's really used to. So all those process goals are like, you stuck to your diet plan, you got good sleep, you kept your house clean, you managed your stress well, and then you got to go to the doctor and they run that blood work. Okay, and this is the blood work. And we're not as pleased with our blood work, and we still have some work to do in terms of our blood work, but that's what we're gonna present tonight. This is how often we're kind of taking a look at our blood work and bringing it to you. So we're at the spring and annual review, which we're doing here in June. And I'm gonna turn it over to Laura to talk about our first data set.
So when we previously spoke with you, we talked a little bit about where we had been in terms of our fall data. We didn't have that winter update. So now we have our winter update. So the first data point was our benchmarking. So that's our reading assessment that we gave all of our students K-8, looking at their progression over time, using the Fontes and Pinnell benchmarking kits, but also the Spanish equivalent of that, or the DRA's equivalent of the EDL, because of the levels that are available on the Fontes and Pinnell in Spanish. Go to the next slide. So the link at the top, we've been providing to you consistently, so that's something you could dig into and look at if you'd like. It gives you all of the different data points in terms of English and Spanish literacy. Each of the graphs looks like the graph on the left here. So this is the grade 4. So that would be the fourth graders that just ended their fourth grade year, okay? And those that are in the dual language program, and this is the English proficiency. And so if you remember our correlation, the red are the students that are 2 or more years below grade level. Then in order of the colors in that top bar, they're in half years. So red is 2 or more years below. Orange is 1.5 years below. Yellow is 1 year below. Blue is half a year below. And green is at grade level where we would expect them to be. This is cohort data. So if you click on that link and you went in and you dug in, you would see that this is actually talking about where these fourth graders were in winter of 3rd grade in the top line, then fall of 4th grade, and then into the winter. So you do see some good growth in terms of how they were attaining their English and recouping some of the loss that we saw over the summer that we talked about at our previous presentation. Overall, the themes and the trends that we see are that the majority of our students did recoup the growth from their summer regression by that winter data point. It's also important to note that we don't do a spring assessment on this because this is a tool that's meant to inform instruction. This is a tool that we give our teachers to be able to use to instruct their students. And by doing it in the spring, that's just testing with no intent to use it for instruction. So we do it in the fall and the winter. The other thing that you'll notice is that in dual language, you do expect that trajectory that our students may be attaining or mastering both languages a little bit at a slower pace than we would expect a student learning one language at a time. But that by that 4th or 5th grade level, we start to see them recoup that and grow more to that typical rate. We are seeing that trajectory. We are seeing that close in 4th and 5th grade with our data. We do also see, though, that we need to put a little continued emphasis on our Spanish literacy development because that wasn't making as much progress as our English. Then our third data point is talking a little bit about student growth. So the Fontes-Vanel assessment, it's a criterion referenced assessment. So it gives us an equivalent of where our students should be developmentally over the years. And so it's important to know that when you're little, you can grow a whole lot really fast. So between kindergarten and the end of 1st grade, the Fontes-Vanel, each level is a letter. So you need to be able to grow from an A all the way to a J by the end of 1st grade. However, every grade level past that is only 3 letters. So you grow so much in kindergarten and 1st grade, and then the growth that you're supposed to make slows down a little bit. So what we're noticing is that our students are not necessarily keeping up with that pace in the lower grade levels that we would expect given those developmental shifts, but we are seeing them recoup it in about 4th grade and then plateau around grade 6. And then our last bullet point is that this was the first year we gave the Fontes-Vanel assessment. So obviously with any new tool and staff learning it, we're going to continue to focus on assessment administration so that we have valid and accurate data and making sure that we're doing that going forward so that we're giving you the best picture. Do you have any questions about the benchmark data? Yes.
So looking at the years that you're showing here, what would you suggest the impact of COVID has had on this growth rate? And if we were to look back prior to COVID, would those numbers look different or would they still be on the same track?
I think that we saw a pretty, I mean, it's a great question. I think we saw a pretty big regression in COVID. And then what we saw going into this school year is that we had to relearn how to be students again. So we did a lot more behavior interventions this year to try to help students reacclimate to being around others, the anxieties that had been built, things like that. So I think as an administrative team, we had hoped to see that rebound a little bit faster than we actually did. But I think you can only learn when you're comfortable and in a good emotional place. So I think the work we've done is going to show going forward, but we haven't necessarily grown as much as we would have hoped post-pandemic, even though we're kind of still in it.
We're seeing those second and third grade classes seem to have had the greatest impact by COVID.
Yes.
So that second grade group, you know, didn't have a typical school year in kindergarten, didn't have a typical school year in first. This was their first typical school year, and it wasn't even that typical, because we still had to keep separate, and, you know, we couldn't gather on the carpet and some of those sorts of things. And the third grade had a typical kindergarten school year, but then has had really atypical learning. So they hadn't learned all those school behaviors and structures and routines solidly before we kind of blew everything up in terms of what school looks like and how we do school. So we do see some more significant concerns in those two grade levels.
I'll also share that personally at home, I have a second grader. And when we had parent-teacher conferences and they presented data to us, me being a data person and understanding what I was looking at, I looked at the teacher and I said, this does not make any sense to me. And it's because the national norm for the second grade class on all assessments slid so far because they were the kids in kindergarten when the school shut down. So that norm of where those second graders are, even the 100th percentile on many of the assessments was considered below grade level because of where they were all performing. So we're seeing the same hit that they're seeing in multiple places.
So do you think that those grade levels, when they get to grade 4, that we will be able to recover and expand back out to the A to J?
I think our optimistic prediction would be that if we can consistently keep them in school and in a place where they can partake in learning, that yes, we would see a lot of that.
And we responded, we put double the second graders in summer school than any other grade level because it was our most hit
Yeah.
grade level. So we're like, let's keep them going as many as we could as another intervention support, trying to lift that group for those that don't.
So looking at these data points too, when you explained the different color bands and what they mean, that helped too, because I was trying to figure out why there was no red in the second, or I mean, in the first in the kindergarten. That explains is because
Be 2 years
you
below.
can't be 2 years below when you're not at, okay, so that helps, because I was wondering why we saw suddenly, you know, a lot of growth of the red in the second and then third, and then, you know, beyond that, because that's scary to look at, and seeing how it didn't shrink quite as much as we would hope in looking through that. But another question is seeing how, and you pointed that out, how big the red got, especially in the Spanish literacy among the dual language, and especially at the lower levels. I know that we switched the percentage of English to Spanish among the incoming kindergartners this last year.
The model.
And but we are gonna build that up rather than having that hit. Is that something we should look at reconsidering, you know, in doing that, or how should we interpret that, or just sort of wait and kind of see more data? And I'm not against that approach, just trying to figure out what we do with that, since that does seem to be a really big red, you know, among some of those.
Want to respond, Ryan?
Yeah, I'd be happy to respond to that.
Come on,
Sure.
we can see.
Looking at our kindergarten data, just being transparent, it's not the data that we would hope it would be. We also know that our kindergartners, like our second and third graders, were those that experienced atypical early childhood learning environments in age 3, age 4, in terms of supervising the implementation of the 90-10 model. We constantly have to be looking at all the student data to make the decisions in terms of what would be best for our students. The students in the program and their families signed up for it to be bilingual, biliterate, multicultural, which is a long-term goal. Looking at our current data though, particularly the SLA and how that progresses up into the 4th and 5th grade, we see that the way that the test is administered for the Spanish literacy assessment in English and in Spanish is administered through monolingual lenses versus our students are simultaneous bilinguals. So when administering it, we've really noticed discrepancies in terms of best practice of how the Fontes and Pinnell or the EDL2 is administered. So Jill Unger and myself did a substantial amount of research in terms of who out there in the field is an expert on this. And so next year, we're going to be partnering with Dr. Laura Senzi Moreno, who wrote the book Rooted in Strength, where she has specific approaches when we are doing these assessments to notice trends in literacy as well as in language, and then model our instruction based on those trends. And this year in the dual language program, in most ways, we've been building the ship or building the plane. I would say now that we have a plane that is operable and it is flying, and year 2 and 3, we need to improve the seats, we need to improve the air conditioner, we need to make enhancements to the system. And then in year 3, once we have 3 data points in order to determine to have comparable data in terms of how the students are progressing in the 90-10 model, I would say that is a time that we should be very in tune to making revisions and or modifications if we continue to see that the Spanish data is not the Spanish as well as the English literacy and language data is not making the growth necessary.
Can you give me an example of what you mean by simultaneous learning?
Yes, absolutely. So for example, at the level A, and Fontes and Pinnell, basically the student needs to read a very short text that says something to the extent of, I see the dog. And part of the reader characteristics at the A level is really just pointing. So the teacher reads it aloud. Afterwards, the student needs to point to each of the words while repeating what the student says. A bilingual student, rather than saying something like, I see the dog, might say something like, yo, which means I in Spanish, see the perro. Both of those are demonstrating level A literacy characteristics, but if we were interpreting that through what Fontes and Pinnell or EDL2, those would all be errors. So that would be not, so as we're looking at the data in kindergarten and you see a lot of the NY, that is, part of that NY is actually where the student is at, but part of it is because the not yet readers.
Thank you.
Sorry, not yet
It's
readers.
okay.
But part of that is because the teachers who have not had that bilingual assessment training may not have been accurately or validly assessing our students.
So what's the consultant gonna help us with?
The consultants is going to partner with us in order to, now that how do we use the EDL2? How do we use Fontes and Pinnell? How do we use this as an accurate measure of our simultaneous bilinguals in order to inform our instruction versus seeing each and every student as monolingual English and monolingual Spanish in 2 separate beings?
And just as a refresher, the Fontes and Pinnell, this is the first year we use that, correct? Because we were using different ones in the past. So that's why it's a learning curve for everybody. And just wanting to point that out.
And then with Fontes and Pinnell, as it's the first year of implementing it, teachers were really learning the system, how to best use the system, but really Fontes and Pinnell is a lot less about the data that we present and a lot more about how it informs our instruction the next day and the next day after that. And so what we really want to train our teachers in order to, in dual language in particular, to use that data to inform literacy and language instruction moving forward.
Thank you, sir.
Problem.
The next data points that we take a look at is our STAR assessment, which we do give 3 times a year. Similarly, the charts are the green category is that you're at the 40th percentile or below. And then the blue category is for our dual language students that were green in one language, but not quite green in the other, but we're trying to look at it through that dual language lens. So if you were proficient in a language, then we were trying to give you credit for that kind of embracing that there are 2 languages happening. Yellow, orange, and red, kind of those similar categories as Laura went through. When we look at our data overall, and same thing, it's cohort data. So when you click in and dig deeper, you see the English literacy and the Spanish literacy and the math charts deep in when you click up on the top. But some of the trends as we looked at all of our data and possible takeaways is that in math, all grade levels increased percentage of students in the green above the 40th percentile, while students in red below the 10th percentile remain above the 10th percentile in every grade level. And across both our data points in math and literacy, what's most concerning to us is the disproportionate number of students below the 10th percentile. So if you just look at 50th percentile and above, we have about half of our kids, 50th percentile and above. We have about half of our kids, 49th percentile and below. So if you just split it like that, it's not too alarming, but when you look at the distribution, it's that the kids that are below the 49th are really below, they're below the 10th. And so that's what's kind of alarming about our data to us is how it's just the distribution of the data, that we have such a disproportionate number of kids below the 10th percentile. And so that's what we're really trying to target and figure out why we have so many kids below the 10th percentile. That makes sense. Anyone have questions when they dug deep into the STAR data?
I actually just have a question on what is the difference between the dual and the mono tests in terms of the STAR? So like, is it, is the dual in?
Yep, so they take the STAR test in English and then they take the STAR test in Spanish. So they take the test twice if they're in the dual language program. But we look at it across in the dual when we summarize it across those languages. So if you're green in dual, you're in the green in both your languages. If you're blue, you're green in one language and kind of approaching in the other language. And then, you know, so we kind of cross language it.
Okay,
so
so
that
it's
we
not
can-
know what Ryan is saying. You know, they could use it both, which is it's just Spanish.
Yeah, I mean, but they're taking the test, so if they understand what they're reading, it's more of a traditional read a passage and answer some multiple choice questions. So it's not like the errors like that, so they can cross language as long as they get the right answer. They got the right answer. And on our math assessment at the younger levels, which is more rote counting and identifying numbers, if they're in the dual language program, we've instructed the teachers that if they say 1, 5, 7, they get, if they're identifying the right number in either language, it's correct. So we've already moved to some of those thinking differently about what we're counting as correct for our dual language program kids. That makes sense. This was kind of our description of that. It got out of order when we sent it of the STAR test, so just move forward past that. Okay, our last way that we were looking at data is our proficiency versus growth analysis. You're below expectations and proficiency if you're at the 39th percentile and below on the STAR test. You met expectation if you're 40th percentile above. And then for growth, if you have a student growth percentile of 49 or lower, you're below expectations, and you meet expectations with an SGP of 50 or higher. For this next assessment, if you want to click to the next slide. And then can you actually click on the annual proficiency growth analysis there? This had, if you remember looking at it, was the color charts where you had the red category, the orange category, the green category, and the blue category. And our goal was that we wanted to decrease the below growth, below proficiency category, our red category, by 5% in grade levels 3 through 8 in both reading and math. And so when we looked at that, we met 5 out of 5 of our math goals. So yay, 100% of our math goals were met. In English literacy, we met 2 out of 6 of our goals. 3 of 6 of our goals were approaching, and 1 of 6 we didn't meet. And then in terms of Spanish literacy, we met 2 out of 4 goals. 0 out of 4 goals were approaching, and 2 of 4 goals we did not meet. We were missing some baseline data during COVID. Trying to do a computer-based test remotely with K through 2nd graders. seemed like not a great plan, so we didn't actually complete the assessments during that COVID year, so we were missing baseline data. So our goal this year was to get all of that data collected, and we were successful, and we have all the rich data that we want for the end of this year, so we completed all of that as well. It's okay, Anna.
Sure.
Yep. And then for next year,
Can I ask real quick, Cindy? So just looking to go back on it, when you look at just the literacy between them, if I went through those grade levels between English and Spanish, it looks like we saw at least a decrease. We didn't hit our goal, but we at least decreased the number of students in the red in 4 out of the 6 categories.
Yeah.
This past year. So I think that's something to know. While it's not where we wanted to be, we still saw 4 out of the 6 actually have a decline.
Yeah.
Which is what we want.
we're heading in the right direction.
Correct. Sorry.
All right, so talking about next year and our proposed goals. So we have 2 different angles we'd like to look at this. So the first one, the state test. So the state does give a test to all of our 3rd through 8th graders every year. And we get preliminary test data at the end of May, early June. We don't really have the real final data until later into the summer. But when we got the preliminary data, we had a long talk about what do we need to do. So the IAR is a 5-point scale. So the students, they take the test and then they're rated. And you have to get a 4 or a 5 to be able to meet. So you're meeting or exceeding expectations for your grade level. And then the students that are a 3 are considered to be approaching meeting. And then the students obviously at a 1 or a 2 are below those expectations. So when we get our preliminary data, it shows us that about 300 students in District 75 fall in that 3 category in both reading and math. And so the goal that we'd like to set is we'd like to take those specific, that cohort of students that got a 3 on the test this year. We'd like to look at their STAR data and we'd like to be targeting them specifically with some added interventions, maybe some after school programming, even a little bit of test taking skills to be able to help them understand how the IAR works, because that matters. And so we're going to help them and look at them specifically in terms of that SGP using the STAR data, because you can't use the IAR because you don't get the final data. And it's one of those things where you have no idea how you're doing until you get that data. So we would do this based on their growth on STAR and hope that we would get them to be able to make that average growth so that a good amount of our 3 students could tip over into that bucket and we could have more of our students meeting at our 4 or 5 next year. Our second goal is that our district para framework, so that's our evaluation system for our teachers, has reformatted how our teachers' growth component of their evaluation is being assessed. And so this chart is actually from that, and it tells you also in response to that student growth percentile on the STAR, looking at the percentage of students that would meet that goal for us. And so what we'd like to do is we would like to set a goal that by building, using our students' SGPs, we would look for the percentage of students and aim for our students to be in the proficient or excellent category in each of our buildings. So that is those are our 2 proposed goals. Do you have any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I'm back. Our shared goal from teaching and learning with Stacy and I was to look at our literacy implementation, specifically our first reading informational text standard 1. So we did this initially in July and then again in January. And so now I thought we'd go over it one more time and tell you what we were able to accomplish through the end of the school year. So here was what we initially presented in terms of why we picked reading informational text standard 1. It's a standard that you can address in your literacy class, whether it be in English or Spanish. It's a standard that we were able to address within our math instruction, our social studies instruction, our science instruction, really all of the content areas, you're able to read details and provide evidence of what you're learning and citing examples of how you know that that particular information was being shared. So we said that we were going to look at the STAR 360 data, which we just reviewed, the Fountain Canal assessment data, which we also just reviewed. And we know that we have room for improvement. And so it was really a good discussion, as uncomfortable as it was, to see the raw numbers, to say, well, this is where we're at and this is what we've accomplished. And now we can really target in specifically on how we're going to move forward. When they were talking about the two extreme ends that we have with the proportion of students who are meeting expectations and those that are at the 10% level, it really struck us that we need to do more within our core instructional program to help all of our students. And that's called tier 1, right? If you're thinking about your levels of support, tier 2 is some level of intervention, tier 3 is more significant intervention. And then if that is not able to support the student, then we look to see what their deficits might be in terms of special education services. But really, in order for us to be able to have the interventionists and the special education teachers focus their time on those students who have the most needs, we need to do more instruction in that whole level classroom, providing all of that specialized small group work so that the teacher can focus on the class, meeting the needs of the individual students in the classroom, and then the specialists would be able to tease out smaller groups of students to provide that extra level of support. So we're gonna tackle this together. In terms of the classroom visits with the literacy look floors, the building principals did an amazing job of that this year. And I know it was a new initiative for them to implement, but I think it was very successful and the teachers really appreciated seeing them in the room and giving them that positive feedback. And I have that data to go over. And then just to review what our art meetings were, that was our artifact review teams, and those were also happening at the building level. And the principals did a nice job of facilitating that. And then sometimes the school-wide consultants were there to pop in and help engage in those conversations. So it was nice to have an extra set of ears and provide feedback there. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so I don't know that the principals saw this yet, but they actually did 292 walkthroughs over the course of the school year across all of the grades pre-K through 8. And you can see the color-coded pie chart. There's lots of colors there. In fact, 7th and 8th grade didn't even make it in the screenshot, but they are represented in the pie graph. And so you can see it really was a nice cross-representation of all of the grades, as they spent a lot of time in our literacy classrooms looking to see all of those components that we had been implementing through our professional development practices on the SIP days and their collaboration time, on the Teacher Institute days with the consultants coming in. And so they really were providing a lot of good feedback on a regular basis. This is all of the content areas that we were able to achieve. And so while primarily we spent more time in our literacy classrooms because the focus of the PD all year was on our literacy initiative, it really was nice to see that reading informational text standard represented across all of the content areas. So that shows that one. And then here were just some pictures that were shared in terms of when we did the artifact review meetings. There were certain themes that were addressed every month in terms of those topics. One of the months was on the anchor charts and how we're using those to have visual cues for the students in all the classrooms. One month was on their readers and writers notebooks and how the students are able to identify themselves as a reader and as a writer. And then the third one is just using multiple texts, because that was the whole intent of focusing on reading informational text standard 1, is as the standard progresses through the grade levels, you start with one text and then you go to comparing two texts and then three texts. And then when you get to the high school, you're really analyzing multiple text features and multiple text types. So here was an example that Stacy is actually sharing at the 120 board meeting. And so I thought this, if you remember, we had a very similar example in January that our middle school students were using. And so this one really resonated with me because I thought, oh, good, this is showing the transition. So we're doing this in our middle school science classrooms. And so it's going to bridge really nicely to the work that they're doing at the high school. As I mentioned, the artifact review meetings were opportunities for the grade level teams to get together and bring evidence or samples of the work that they have been doing in the classrooms. And it's a really nice opportunity for a teacher to say, this is what I tried in my room. It totally tanked. Don't do this. Or this is what I tried in my classroom and it went really well. And the kids were all super engaged. If you want me to share it with you, you guys should do it too. And it was such a good way for them to be able to collaborate and share ideas. And there's always power in numbers and brainstorming together. But some of the guiding questions that the teachers were asked to reflect on were here in terms of, what really went well, what helped our students as readers and writers, how did those decisions impact their instruction, and how did it impact their student learning? And so those were the kinds of conversations that they were having in those meetings. This is a slight end to what we intended on in terms of what our artifact review teams were talking about. We ended up doing some reflections in December and in May, because those were times in the year where it seemed like a good pause in terms of there was a lot of other things going on in the buildings at the time. So to throw in a new theme seemed, we had high hopes, but in reality we had to regroup. And so those 2 months we kind of pulled off the table. But the buildings were able to facilitate 27 of these artifact meetings in the fall. They had 9 reflection meetings in December, 9 reflection meetings again in May, and then 36 artifact review meetings in January through April. And so these were, if they're kind of nodding. I know that meeting fatigue is real and it happened, but I think the conversations that came out of these discussions was really beneficial for the teachers and for the students. So in looking to this upcoming school year, I think it'll be important for Stacy and I to continue that shared literacy goal between D75 and 120 so that we can continue to focus on that particular standard across all of our content areas. And then we did share or talk, we didn't share. I shared with you in the winter those 5-year goals in terms of all of the curriculum content areas. And so having the teaching and learning team and the student services team really focusing on that and helping the building principals to facilitate these curriculum goals will only help us continue to grow and develop. And really focusing on our specifically for reading this year, we want to look at that small group instruction. And for our writing workshop, we want to get that strong writing cycle down so the students become strong producers of final products and pieces will be important to us. And I think that's all I was going to say. Any questions on that? No questions? Come on.
So clarifier then, with all the meetings that took place and what you just described, when I think back to July, we kept talking about consistency. And it's consistency and support, not only by grade level, but vertically by building. As we've progressed through the year and all the work that's been put in by our admin and our staff, as you've looked at what we're doing curriculum through literacy, do we have clarity on what we're doing for expectations for our students from the time they're in kindergarten to the time they go through 8th grade?
I would say we're much clearer than we were a year ago today. Absolutely. I think we all have a very clear understanding of what our common goal is. I think if you describe any part of the workshop, everyone could tell you the common definition of what a mini lesson means. They could tell you what interactive read aloud means. They could tell you what genre means. And I don't know that we were all in that place a year ago today. I think in terms of our small group instruction, this is where we have room to continue to develop. As Ryan described and Cindy and Laura talked about the Fontes Pinnell benchmark data. It is an instructional tool and our output is only as good as our input. And until our data is secure and where we know the student's instructional level is, it's harder to understand where to start that instruction. So if we give the assessment and the data comes out that they're a level B and we provide instruction with a level B book, but really maybe the student is a level E, we have now not pushed them to their fullest potential. And so I think that will be the focus this year is reviewing those assessment expectations, reviewing the purpose of small group instruction and why it's so valuable and important to our growth, and then really being specific in how we're putting those students in those groups, and then not leaving them in the groups for the length of the school year. That we're reassessing them regularly enough to say, okay, as you know, I think Laura, you were talking about how you need to go from an A to a J in a very short amount of time. So you can't be sitting in level C books for months on end. We have to get in, we have to do the work, we have to move along. We got places to go and books to read here, people. We can't be hanging out in level C all year. Thank you. All right, Jill, you're up next. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Jill, I'm the Teaching and Learning Coordinator. I'm extremely honored and excited to share the progress of our shared initiative between District 120 and District 75 to grow future educators and leaders in Mundelein. Dr. Kroll is going to be sharing the same presentation at the Mundelein High School Board of Education meeting as well. On June 9th, in a speech about the importance of recruiting, supporting, and retaining teachers, Education Secretary Miguel Cardona said, "It's not enough to say we've got to lift the profession or teacher appreciation. We really have to start putting policy and funding behind this. That's the bottom line. It's time for action." So Cardona went on to explain ways to address teacher shortages, and top on his list were grow your own programs targeting high school students. For the past 2 years, Larry Calhoun from District 120 and I, along with committee members from District 120 and District 75, have been working on exactly this type of program, the Aspire Education Academy. So the Aspire Education Academy is a high school course pathway for students interested in becoming educators that includes dual credit opportunities, an authentic internship experience, college application, financial aid advisement, scholarship opportunities, and most importantly, student teaching and interview opportunities in Mundelein, District 75 and 120. Oops. Okay, can you go to the next one? Sorry, I think these slides might be in a different order.
I reduced a lot of the slides.
Oh, I did not
So
know
we
that.
shortened them up.
Okay, okay. So should I just tell this part? Okay. Okay, so this year we applied for and were awarded the Career Tech Ed Career Pathway Grant from the Illinois State Board of Education. And this is a 4-year grant totaling $111,100 for funds dedicated to supporting this program in both districts. Our first year cohort will occur in the fall of this school year. And here you can see the number of students that signed up and the demographic distribution of students that are going to be entering our program. So for our future timeline, in the fall of this next school year, students will begin the pathway courses. In the spring of 2023, Dr. Kroll and I will be recruiting teachers from District 75 and training them in order to be hosts for the interns that will be entering and supporting students in District 75 from District 120. And then actually, this was a small typo, but in the fall of 2023, our first internships will be working in District 75. In the spring of 2025, our first Academy scholarships will be awarded to students. Is it okay if National Louis University has committed to granting one full tuition scholarship for an Aspire Education Academy graduate each year. And we're really thrilled to have this opportunity for our students. In the fall of 2028, we'll host our first Aspire Academy alumni student teachers. We will interview Aspire candidates for open positions, and we will have ongoing grow our own cycle that will continue throughout the years here in Mundelein. And before I close, I just wanted to add that, as you can see, universities such as National Louis University or the Illinois State Board of Education are aligned with our work and have set up funds to support programs such as ours. When we began creating our vision for this in 2020, these opportunities did not yet exist. But because we are on the cutting edge with our planning, we're in a position to build partnerships with universities and apply for grants to give our students and our future educators the best.
That was Jill's idea to do.
Thank you. And does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so our first goal, these are the same goals that we presented as Dr. Myers explained last summer. And so the first goal was about the restorative restart as we were coming back to school. So it was to welcome them back to school after COVID-19 pandemic. Notice we said after the COVID-19 pandemic, and to reestablish the positive school habits and institutionalize a wellness focus for the year. So that was our first goal, and just kind of getting the kids back to school, getting them, as Laura explained, just learning how to school again and how to be a student again. Go ahead. And our second goal that we had was the objective of literacy focus, and this was in partnership with Teaching and Learning specifically to re-engage the community in learning through the implementation of the workshop instructional model. And that's what Sarah was explaining as well with the workshop model. So now we'd like to give you our updates for our end of the year for our schools. And there we are with all of our mascots. The eagle's very short, by the way, I just realized. Little eagle.
So, good evening, Mark Pilot, principal at Carl Sandburg Middle School. What we presented this month from now, last year, was basically we wanted to have the kids aspire to live the Tiger Code. We had some advisory programming in place that we were going to expand. We had Tiger Code activities. We had a Taste of Sandburg with different activities going on throughout the course of the school year. We added pulse surveys to just help and getting a pulse of the classroom just to help our staff realize where kids were at. And then we wanted to bring back our extracurricular and co-curricular activities. So what this ended up looking like and the successes that we've had, and then the next steps that we want to do, Anna, if you would, thank you. We did institute and took a lot of feedback from the kids through the pulse survey. We asked homeroom teachers, we gave it 4 times a year. As you can see, August, November, February, and May. Basically, one of the proudest things we had is when the kids started in August, about 29% of them were very confident in school. We got that up to 45% overall at the end of the year. 98% of them felt confident at the end of the school year. The last, one of the questions we added in May was how confident do you feel about going to next year? I think one of the keys here is 96% of the kids felt confident about going into school next year, and that includes our 8th graders. And that's quite a transition going from, it's a big transition from 5th to 6th. It's even a larger transition from 8th to 9th. So to have 96% of our kids next year feel confident overall, we were very, very pleased with that. Also, we had 51% of our kids participate in a restorative talk, which is basically what restorative talk means. Probably heard that a lot in different educational circles, but basically it's an inclusive communication where trauma occurs. So trauma, and you don't have to, trauma could be anything. It could be, the argument you had with your sister because she wore a sweater, or whatever happened at the house that comes into school. It could be an argument between friends during lunch. Or it could be, tragic on the other end as well. What we worked with our kids and staff on and introduced them to is basically restorative conversation practices. So those could happen in small groups, class circles, so whole classrooms, one-on-one, but it went beyond just administration and social workers talking with the kids when kind of crisis arose. We actually worked with the staff and got into the classrooms. Ryan Wood, our EP at Sandburg, did a really nice job of modeling what this looked like, put on a full presentation at our January Institute for the rest of the staff, not just Sandburg staff, but everybody, to learn about restorative practices. So that number, I think when we did it in November and February, was like 8%. So it really ramped up into the spring, which we were happy about, because basically the kids go through four stages. They reflect what happened, what went on, and then they basically restore, which is it could, think of it as an apology, but it's not necessarily just saying I'm sorry. It's saying it with action. And then they retool. So what don't I know that got me into this situation? What could I do better next time? So, like what we talk with middle schoolers about a lot about is right sizing the problem. How big of a deal is this really? And did you react or did you overreact? And so we kind of help the kids retool is the 4th step. And then we celebrate, pointing out when they do well, when they rebuild that trust with the friend that got broken, whatever that is. It's not easy to do. I think parents do this naturally at home. You don't think of those 4 categories, but you have sibling arguments and you sit the kids down and you work to keep the siblings part of the family, because you say things like blood is blood. You can only rely on your sister. I know I've said that to my girls, and that's who you're going to rely on when mom and dad are gone. And so that we were very pleased with that, because 51% of the kids felt comfortable. This was self-reported, felt comfortable to say, 1, they recognized it, and 2, they said, yeah, I did it. And so that was cool. The other part is we restored all of our extracurriculars. And so you can see the data up there. I think the coolest thing is, now granted in 2019-20, we didn't have track, NJHS, and some of the community service pieces, because we truncated the school year in March, but so we probably would have been around 72% is what we projected, and we were at 74% of the kids participated in extracurricular activities. So 26% of them didn't, for a variety of different reasons. We surveyed the kids at the end of the school year to find out why. A lot of it was childcare, other activities kids involved in, horseback riding, ice skating, hockey, whatever it may be. And then we also asked them, well, that's next, but then we also created a couple new clubs and expanded them. So we're pleased with our restart. Where we want to go next year, which is the next slide, is we want to continue the pulse surveys, we want to review the 5 essentials data, which came in, and there is I think it's in the supportive learning environment, the kids basically respond about school safety. And if you were at the promotion ceremony, which all of you were. I think our keynote speaker, Naomi, basically said she feels real safe. The data didn't report that. So there's something going on with their kids about safety in school. Because if they're having restorative conversations and they're feeling good about that, that should be rebuilding the trust, but yet they reported on the survey that they're worried about safety. And so I don't know if that's COVID. We need to have some focus groups to kind of get after that. So we want to review that 5 essentials data with our building leadership team and then figure out what the next steps are. We want to continue to train the staff in restorative practices, specifically blending those zones of regulation. Zones of regulation are basically, you know, how you feeling today. So it's like a checkpoint for teachers. It's color coded. So like blue is, I feel sad. Red could be, I feel angry. Green is, I'm in a good spot. And we basically teach the kids to talk through that. So before they get dysregulated and go off and say something foolish, and angry, we know that, so we can approach them differently. So we started that this year. We want to continue that. We've also retooled our behavior matrix and interventions. And so we want to introduce that to the staff and the kids as well. It was talked about this year, but we didn't formally introduce it. So we're going to formally introduce that next year. We have an opportunity to do a lot of collaboration through the new contract. We're very excited about that. The staff voted to actually go like 8 hours almost on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So they have a 7.25 hour, 7 hour and 15-minute day. They voted to come in 40 minutes early. So they're going 7 hours and 55 minutes. Also means they can come in a little bit later on Mondays and Fridays. But they built that time in, and it's not taking away from student start time. This is just that teacher time that we built into the front end of the day. It was 30 minutes every day for 150 minutes a week. We're still doing 150 minutes a week of collaboration time, but the staff voted to kind of package that and meet on Tuesdays as a grade level, Wednesdays as a department, and Thursdays about kids. You could meet with your co-teacher, maybe social workers, maybe it's a parent and you're bringing the child in sooner, just to have those one-on-one conferences. So we're super excited about that. And that was really up to the staff. I wanted to do it, but you know, that was a contract piece because it went. So I'm very pleased that they voted that way. We're moving homeroom to the end of the day in our discussions. Normally it's at the beginning of the day to start. In our discussions, through the restorative piece, we wanted to add some time for reflection, not only for the kids, but for the staff as well to have with the kids. So especially that pulse survey piece, just kind of bring that reflective practice at that end of homeroom time. And it's every day, it's 15 minutes. So we have no wonky schedule on Wednesday. It's just a straight 15 minutes every day for teachers to touch base with kids. Part of the pulse survey in our areas of growth, that 50% of the kids, and this is part of maybe that safety piece, is they feel uncomfortable asking for help. I know a lot of middle schoolers feel that way anyway, but what we want to create is that restorative environment where kids can feel like they can come and ask for help, not just with your favorite teacher or with the teacher that you know the best, but with anybody. And so we're working on that, as well as 21% of them still worried about making friends. So that's a tough spot for middle schoolers. Friends group shifts. So how do we help them navigate that? And just with those two ideas in mind, we want to develop our basically our Tiger Time, our advisory curriculum with those social emotional pieces, executive functioning, discovering and owning your voice, enhancing peer relationships. And then what came up in our activities is the kids would like to look up into a cooking class, sewing, dance, and tennis. So I'll reach out to Troy Perola, for example, see if the courts are available. And if we can run a club, we'll get them over to the high school and see what we can do. You know, those types of pieces, I think we're excited about offering. I don't know if you guys have any questions. If not, I'll turn it over to Tanya. Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
So Mechanics Grove, we, just to go back to kind of what our things were that we were, what it looks like for us and the things we were doing. We are a school that leads the pack. So for those of you that are new to the board, we lead the pack every day. That's part of our vision of our school, and P stands for being proactive. A is for achieving your goals. C is for acting with courage, being brave. And then our K is for choosing kindness. So we had started a wolf pack time every day. It's kind of like the tiger time. It's kind of like a homeroom, even though they're in their homeroom all day. It's their time for social emotional, to focus on our Leader in Me program, to do our second step, and eventually this upcoming year to talk about zones of regulation as well. I just mentioned our second step lessons. And then the wellness support as well. We added in some spirit days and our SEL time weekly to review student concerns. That was with our school social worker, school psychologist, student services coordinator, and so on. So our successes, the next slide, please. We had quite a few successes and an absolutely wonderful year. Some of the greatest things is that our celebrations and our events happened again in person, many of them. Our fifth graders every year take a trip to Camp Duncan, which is up in Volo. It is our outdoor education experience. And it's just an amazing opportunity, not only for some of the students who may never experience sleeping in a cabin with peers, boating, archery, all of those other things, even just eating in a mess hall at a camp, right? All of those things. We were able to go full force, all in, thank the Lord, and so excited about it. And we were able to have 178 of our 183, I think we had at the time, students attend. We did have 5 or so students and their families who chose not to go, and we had them at school, and we still had some activities for them and carried on their day as well. We were able to do our Olympic Day. That's our field day at the end of the year. It's our celebration. The entire school participates. That's all on the last day of school, we had 499 students. It goes up and down. But also for our Leader in Me program, we hold family Leader in Me nights where we bring in families. We practice some of the habits. Sometimes we're synergizing and they're creating a family goal or mission statement. Sometimes we're talking about setting goals and jobs and leadership in the home, things like that. And we were able to hold our 2 that we usually do, which we haven't had in now 1.5 years. And each of them had over 50 families, to the point where we had to overflow into the hallway and into our second gym, which we've never had to do before. So it was evident that these families were so excited to be a part of all of our exciting things again. Our Readers and Writers workshops, obviously Sarah has talked about that. We've been talking about it all year long. When the question came from Dr. Myers, do we have a vision of where we're going? The answer to me is absolutely yes. I can tell you that every one of our staff members is on that train, riding on the train, and some are even driving the train in the building. So, or plane, I guess, as Ryan referred to before. So absolutely, our students are practicing their independent time. That's where that learning is coming from their independent practice. And it's just been wonderful to watch and see and experience. And then we also had the Fountas and Pinnell assessment, which all of our teachers have learned to assess the students. And now I think that our next step is really focusing on truly how to use that to drive instruction. That's kind of that next deeper level that they're going to be working on, and doing some refresher training and all of that in August as well. Our dual language teams created and implemented their units. I know Ryan mentioned that before, but our teams in 3rd through 5th grade created 6 units, and they all taught at least 5 of them. So that's really exciting. And then we talked about, we've talked about it during the year, OG, you might have heard, which is the Orton Gillingham, that our teachers were trained in during the summer, and then it was implemented as a Tier 1 instruction. And in the fall, we'll start up again. This time we'll start a little bit at some different levels, because we'll now know where the students are coming in from, and they've been doing it now for multiple years at Washington. So those kiddos coming up in 3rd grade especially will be very well versed in it, and we'll be excited to start that. And going into our specific focus for the future, I'm excited. We're going to bring in zones of regulation as well. I know Stephanie has offered to kind of train me and walk me through that, and we'll do some things with staff, and the kiddos coming up to MG are very well versed in it. So we want to make sure that we have that environment for them where they'll feel comfortable and successful, and maybe even being the leaders to show the 4th and 5th graders how to use it.
Our Wolfpack time, I'm super excited about this. As I mentioned, this is our social emotional time where it is in every classroom and it's a blocked out 20-ish minutes or so. This year, we are doing it the very first thing in the morning, and every staff member in the building will be involved. So in every single classroom, there will also be maybe a paraprofessional or a PE teacher or a principal or assistant principal or a parent coordinator, whoever it is. We will be partner, like co-teaching our Wolfpack time for students so that they can see the common message among all of us. And so that we can also collaborate with people we may not normally collaborate with. And then it also will make sure that we're bringing that language even more consistently throughout the school, all of our 7 habits, our zones of regulation that's going to be a part of this, our second step topics. And then, as we've mentioned, there'll be a strong professional development focus for writers' notebooks and writers' workshop next year. We really went super heavy and super excited about reading workshop or readers' workshop and readers' notebooks. And we kind of, the writing was there, but it was just kind of on the surface. So we're looking forward to really diving deeper with that. And then also, as I said, just really using that F&P resource that we have to use it to drive instruction. Any questions?
Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
So a year ago, when we said what was it going to be at Washington, we really were talking about what Cindy mentioned about teaching kids school. Because we realized that none of our kids had had a year in school yet. So we focused on the Aspire to Learn and Live with Eagle Pride. We set up Eagle Hour, which we have now changed to Eagle Time because it wasn't an hour. It's only 25 minutes. We got some lessons going. We did second step. We started the zones of regulation. It's really funny to listen to the kids in the hallway. And they'll go, I'm in the red. And somebody will say, do you need a tool? I need the sensory pathway. Okay, cool. Yeah, I bring it out of their way. So they really learn to identify it. Even the teachers, sometimes we all look at each other and say, we're sort of grello. We're ready to go, but we're a little anxious. So that language has all gotten there, introduced. And then we continued the Wellness Wednesdays. They took a little bit of a different spin. They previously had been more about fitness, and now they were more about behavior and the zones, but we blended that in. So then where did we succeed? So I will tell you that as the principal coming in the middle of COVID, the biggest success we had is we returned to being able to have families back in the schools, having events. So we started the year very bravely with our welcome back to school night, where we were all masked, but the place was packed. Then we slowed down a little bit as things happened. We did have 2 family reading nights. The poetry family reading night in April only had about 30 families, but the fall reading night had about 60 families. We had MHS students come to Washington to be mentors and started working with Stacy and Sol on that. That was really very fun. The big kids coming today. So we hope to continue that. Kindergarten registration was in the height of February and wondering what things were going to happen. It wasn't a great turnout, but we were able to hold it both virtually and in person. And then we had a fitness night, which I actually was here in negotiations, and they were sending me pictures, and it just like took over the whole building. I don't know, Christy, you were with me, so you weren't here. Were you there, Emily, for fitness night? And they couldn't even keep track. Folk dance night was a huge success, where the gym again was packed and couldn't even begin to keep track of how many families. Fun fair they held outside in May and raised over $3,000. And thank you, Dr. Myers, for your pie in the face extra fundraiser that happened with it. And then we had a second grade clap out on the last day of school, where families came outside enjoying their students, took some great pictures. And I think that was a huge bring it back to normal message that we sent. So we also embraced Orton Gillingham, the workshop model and Fontes Pinnell assessment. The big, this was year 2 for us for Orton Gillingham at Washington. It was led all grade levels to teach phonetics skills and lessons to meet their grade level expectations. as suggested by Orton Gillingham. So that was exciting to know that we got where they wanted us to be. The assessments were given throughout the year and drove pacing and instruction. And most importantly, now we have final assessments that will let next year's teacher know where to start, especially at MG. The other biggie is we spent a lot of time on SEL and behavior at Washington. We actually in the spring brought in Doug Bolton's team and developed an SEL team that has 2 related service staff members, 2 classroom teachers, and 3 administrators. We are continuing that work this summer to develop hardcore Eagle time, scope and sequence lessons, common language, expectations, and all of those good things to keep that SEL and understanding what school is about, moving in the right direction. We did decrease our support calls. I know we talked in January about having lots of support calls. We decreased them from an average of 10 support calls a day in over 15 rooms to 1 or 2 support calls a day, over 2 to 3 rooms, and those children did have specific behavior plans. So often you would hear Cindy in the hallway saying, work the plan, work the plan. Nobody give, work the plan. And it worked when we worked the plan, right, Cindy? And then the dual language teachers created and taught all 6 units at each grade level. They're super excited to fine tune some things this summer, or they already did with Ryan, but they really just loved creating their units to be able to really blend the English and Spanish and to teach well. And then finally, we did develop some Spanish foundational skills, scope and sequence. They don't really exist in the published world. So we took what we know to be best practice, what we know about Spanish language acquisition, started creating some of our own materials, which we will continue working on and having ready. Our focus in 3 weeks, the SEL team is back together for 3 days. That will be our big focus, is to get that a strong focused Eagle time daily instruction with the zone's second step and Wellness Wednesday. We do want to continue our Orton Gillingham Readers and Writers Workshop knowledge. We really want to work on our using F&P to drive our small group instruction. Like Sarah said, you can't stay at a C. You got to keep that train going. And we want to make sure that that train is really going. And then finally, we're super excited to bring volunteers back, clubs back, parent activities back, some new, some old, some changed, and really what we're calling at Washington, returning to real school. Because we're excited to be back in school. Questions? I'll turn it over to Carol.
So this year we took a look at the same thing that the other buildings did. We really looked at aspiring to learn, and again, our littles had never been in school, most of them, even those that did start in 1920 were not with us when we came back to school. So they had moved on to the other buildings. So we had all kids that had never been in school, and some of them had only seen us on Zoom. So we first had to come to the fact that yes, we're real people and not in the TV, and kind of get kids used to just being at school and sharing items and those types of things. So we took a lot of lessons of second step and getting them into the social emotional learning things. We really focused on establishing that communication with parents and making sure that we involve them through meet and greets, family involvements, education nights, family communication, those types of things. And then along with that, we also spent a lot of time as a team kind of celebrating our messages and our celebration, bringing ourselves together as a group and sharing our resources, and incorporating some spirit days and stuff for our kids to get them kind of acclimated to what is school and what do you do when you're at school. So some of our successes that we looked at, first of all, I have a success that's not on here, is that the now kids age 6 months can get vaccinated.
Yes.
Say woohoo! So I'm happy to have some of our kids vaccinated for the fall. So Anna, you can move forward to the next slide. So we did have 4 parent events this year. We started our year with an ice cream social where we had parents outside because we were able to do that. And so that kind of got our parents kind of acclimated. We attended an activity at Lamb's Farm when we had about 50 families attend out of our 75 families, which was great. We did a parent coffee for our parents online with some of our parents, which was great. So we did some interactive with the parents online. And then we also had parents at the park at the end of the year. So we met them at the very end of the year at a park. And we had about 40 parents of ours attend that and just kind of meet us there and celebrate the end of the year. We also developed individualized student progress reports for our little, so based on the Illinois Early Learning Development Standards. So there's 8 different areas of standards, including like math and reading. Yes, we do that at the little age too. And so across all those, and so we have those as an actual report card, so to speak, to go home with our littles across all the standards for them. So they get used to meeting those standards and where they're at. And we get the parents used to, this is where your kids are going to be, we're going to be looking at your kids and moving them forward in the areas of reading and language arts and math and social emotional and speech and language and those types of things. So we also focused on some of our unit planning or guaranteed viable curriculum. So we really focus on developing common units and those types of things as a group. So we actually returned to play, so it's very hard to teach kids how to share and everything when they were sitting at their own individual desk rather than trying to play together. So we had to, at some point, our teachers were integrating into their play at their seats. It looked very different than what you would see in a normal preschool classroom. So when we were finally able to open it up, our kids were like, "What? I can play with the kid next to me? I don't know about that." So so we had to kind of build them up to that and kind of teach them that it was our job to integrate ourselves into their play and not bring the play to them. They could make their way around the room to our different centers, such as blocks and drama and all the things that we would expect to see in a preschool, which actually through all of their play is how they learn how to be a student and how they learn how to utilize those skills and how to use those academics and how to use those speech and language skills and how to use those motor skills. So opening that back up for us meant a lot. We also actually really had some classroom libraries being built up this year, thanks to the work of Sarah and Jill and an outside consultant that matched with our units of study. So we really want to include a lot of books on diversity and students with disabilities. We were able to do that, and we'll have those books into our hands for next school year. So we're really excited about that. And then we're really excited about continuing to focus on our team unity and making sure that we're working together as a group, despite the different needs of all of our littles, to make sure that we're collaborating and working on things together. So our goals for next year are to continue building our units of study or our guaranteed viable curriculum based on those Illinois Early Learning Standards. We really want to focus on the small group instruction. Actually, Sarah talked about that earlier, and we want to really focus on that at the little too. Focus on those pre-academic and those early learning skills to get them ready for all those things going forward. We are actually going to be working on the introduction to Orton-Gillingham, as well as the zones of regulation that we'll also be working on, and then really continuing to plan together and build our team together. Any questions? Mark, I think this is you.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
So basically for the restorative piece, one of the goals that the principals met along with the rest of the district team was to continue the consistent implementation of SEL supports. As you see, there've been a common introduction of zones of regulation. That was a common theme this year. We're going to dive a little bit deeper and apply that as age appropriate next year. And then second, we're going to continue that learning engagement through literacy. We're going to continue at every grade level. And in the ELA department, the reading and writing workshop model to grow our readers and writers. I think one of the coolest things is as we've started to talk, I think it's most evident at the middle school, but it's a K-8 theme. As we've started to talk about readers and writers rather than working on reading and writing, we've shifted the focus from the verb of the ability to read and write to the kid. to the reader and the writer and growing their abilities in those areas. And the transition is Sandberg worked to adopt a new social studies curriculum under the guidance of Jill Unger this spring. And one of the things that the staff wanted was to introduce and do a launch. So the language is transitioning out of the ELA department, which I think is much more natural in the K-5 settings, but out of the ELA department into the other departments. So they want their kids to think like the historian, be historians when they're talking social studies, be mathematicians when they're talking math. I think that that's a subtle shift, but I think it's a shift that takes us to just back to the restorative piece about working on the person, the kid, not just the skill, but the person themselves and how they interact with that skill. So those are our two goals. That's where we're at. I don't know if anybody has questions for any of us. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I think Peter, right? Yeah.
Yep, Peter.
Yep.
Good evening, everyone. So I've got quite a lot of presentations I'm following, and they were pretty impressive. So let's bring down the bar just a little bit for me. But actually, I'm pretty impressed by this. And actually, while it makes this tougher to follow because of the presentations you've seen, also makes my job easier because of all the programs you see out there. I mean, from the dual language to the field day or everything else that's going on, parent nights, it's pretty incredible, all the things. There's a lot of stories to tell, a lot of positive stories. So that's kind of where I come in. I wanted to tell you about the goals we had this year was really just to get out and tell as many good stories as possible, to cover, to promote the important news and events that are out there. We've had three main channels that we do this through: social media, the website, and the news media, not in that order. There was a lot of work that went to social media, but we also got placements in the newspaper, and we're always trying to drive traffic to the website, put things on the website. So, and we're learning as we go, we're getting there, but we wanted to get out a lot of stories. So we did have some good success as far as the quantity of stories and the quality. We also kind of learned where we can grow and improve in a lot of these areas. So I know that we posted more stories this year. Might be an unfair comparison because in the previous year, we didn't have as many of these programs. We weren't digging a tree for Arbor Day. We weren't out there in the fields. We weren't doing as many things. There weren't as many stories to go out there and get. So we were more active this year. But we did post as many stories as we could. We got a lot out there. I will say it's not just about the numbers. Okay, it's about the quality of the post. It's about posting stories, placing stories in news media with a purpose. So there's a strategy behind this, and we're just developing that strategy. I really want to see where we are this year, where our starting point is. So, and before I get into some of these numbers, I do want to talk about, we did limit my work in P75 to Facebook this year, instead of getting into Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and some other channels, for the simple reason that it's easy to get overwhelmed when you have so many channels and so much going on. I really wanted to focus on getting the message out, staying to one channel. Social media can be a full-time job, and certainly I had other things going on as well. So we limited to Facebook, but we did get a good handle on learning what's popular, where we get interaction from the public, kind of what drives folks to the website. So for instance, we'll take a post and we'll say, for more on this story, click here, and we'll bring them to the website or a recent news item where we'll tell about some program, dual language, or whatever we have going on. So analytics is kind of a base point. You can see I went on the upper left, it says from July 21 to June 22. That's where some of these numbers come in. And those numbers don't mean a lot on their own, but it will give me a base point. Instead, if you look at the three items on the right, those three boxes, one's a high school, but then the next one where it says Frozen Junior right in the middle, that was a post we did for Mark's middle school, and actually got almost 4,000 views. And it was a promotion of Frozen Junior. So people were excited to get their kids back on stage and do this kind of thing. And I think that told me a lot. If you look at Mechanics Grove on the far right, that got almost 2,000 views, and that was for the Lighthouse Awards, meaning that people are proud, the parents are proud of their kids. They'll share it with their grandparents. Look what Bobby did, look at, you know, and I think they want to get their kids' faces out there. They want to see what they're doing. I know one of the things in the high school that was a huge success this year for posts was the honor roll. And then I also jotted down, and this goes back to what Shane said earlier, the D75 site, the most popular post, which I don't have on here specifically, was paraprofessionals are needed. And I think people were sharing that with other people. They were getting out there, they were liking it, it got a lot of reaction. Did it translate into getting a lot more applications for paraprofessionals? Not necessarily. But the idea is that you can get out there and you can get attention to something. But we really want to focus where we need to bring attention to, what we want to promote. Last year, and you'll see this when we publish our Spotlight newsletter very soon, that it's really about the focus on literacy this year. Next year, it'll be focus on writing. It'll be more about dual language. It'll be about some of Jill's programs, which is coming in. It'll be about, you know, the things that Dave is doing to improve some of the school facilities. So there's a lot we can do. Washington, Arbor Day was the biggest hitter, okay? We posted an Arbor Day and that got huge hits because it was a tradition out at Washington to have Arbor Day, and it was gone for what, 3 years, something like that. So it's back now and people are excited about it. At Lincoln, it was a preschool screening. That was a huge thing. We didn't do a lot of posts at Lincoln. We plan on doing more there and more at Washington. But, you know, with the preschool screening, that's important. You know, when we get that out there, one parent's going to say to the other, hey, did you hear about this? You know, so we want to make sure we've got positive news stories out there. We promote things like programs and plays, and that we tell them when registration is, when preschool screening is, when we've got openings at the school district. So it's all these different things. We want to do it strategically and with a purpose. So as we go into next year, we do want to expand more beyond Facebook to Twitter, to maybe Instagram, and even use YouTube a little bit. Again, efficiently and not diluting our work in any one area. We want to use it to proactively bring people to our website. And we want to use some of these analytic comparisons to improve our social media reach. So we kind of see where we were, and if it's working or if it's not working, we slow down on that, put the accelerator on something else. We did have an opportunity to hire a new webmaster recently. And with that opportunity, we chose someone that has some social media background, that's excellent with video, and we're going to try to utilize that. So maybe we can expand, put more video on there, maybe do something more in advance, more with a purpose. We're going to bring out a whole calendar of things we need to cover, what's most important, what's secondary, and kind of play the game that way. But we do want to bring a more proactive approach to this. And again, it's not the number of stories, but it might translate to an increased number of hits. So with this baseline, we'd like to compare our social media analytics and with our specific website analytics that we're going to expand on this year and kind of see how we're performing. So we'll make adjustments, we'll measure them and make those adjustments as needed. So that's kind of the story. And again, it's a starting point for us. It was my first year as a shared service employee for PR, but we expect to expand on this, and with the help of everybody in here, we've got a lot of good stories to tell. Any questions?
Just have one.
Yeah.
You mentioned multiple times that we're trying to push using social media, push people to our website. Now that we have a webmaster, are we gonna get the landing page to not go to the middle school?
Yeah.
I
Yes.
can't tell you how many parents keep
Right.
telling me that
Actually,
and complaining about that,
so-
and I agree that it's.
Right, so that was done a couple months ago, and American Eagle has lagged on that. However, talked to the guy today, and we expect it very, very soon. I'm not gonna give you a date because we're gonna hold you. But yeah, that's been a frustration on our end as well. And we do want that to be working, and we're.
At least
again,
hopefully
with
into the school
purpose.
year, the new school year, so that.
Oh, yeah,
the
for
new
sure.
families and everybody else, because.
Maybe by the end of the month, we'll make sure I've been told it's coming soon.
Thank you.
So that's a good point and something that we really work on. In fact, when the new webmaster was going around meeting everyone, they said, oh, good, the new webmaster's here. Now we get our what's called a splash page. It's not on her, it's not her, but she's very good and she's gonna, she's detail oriented. So a lot of those things are gonna be clarified and things in the website. You'll see our goal for the website is to make the D75 pages look more like the high school page and the high school page. So that when people go through the system, they know how to navigate by the time they get to the high school. It will be pretty clear.
I think Mark just did that on purpose to steer everybody to the school.
Hey,
Yeah,
You know.
getting all the calls for the.
I get a lot of calls.
Exactly.
Well, for the families who don't have middle schoolers, it's frustrating.
We have a
when they
12-month
see-
secretary, so she
Yeah.
can answer them. Or
Transfer the
direct
calls.
them where they need to go.
See, now we got people talking about our website. That's a good thing.
I don't know if that's the PR we
They
want.
That's one strategy. Any other questions?
Good.
You're right.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's so frustrating.
So some of the things that the board has been talking about is things in terms of the direction that we're moving in, next month, we're having a discussion about strategic plan and we're gonna be developing. What's the chances of you becoming involved and following what we're doing and having some sort of press releases going out to the community
Mhm.
about what the board is doing, what
Sure.
the board has accomplished, what the board, as we start moving through this? Because there's nothing that's going to the community, that connection
Right.
to the community about what the school board is doing.
I think it's real important, yeah, and I'd like to do that. So I want to tell the full story, and it always starts with the school board and then with the superintendent's office and on down the line. So I think that strategic plan, how the school board works within that is a real important story to tell. And that's something we can get out to the media. That's something we can put on our website, that's something social media, it fits all of those. I will tell you something about working with the news media, because I'm an old reporter. It used to be that you tell a reporter, give them a story idea, and then they'd go back and filter it and tell it through their own way. News media are very skeleton crews. They don't have a lot of people, a lot of reporters out there. If I can tell the story in my own words and just hand it to them, a lot of times that goes in the paper as is. So we can keep this, whatever we want, we can control the message and keep it positive, and that's the other, strategy we have to do that.
Even you mentioned, with the superintendent's office, and I think it's important too, when we start talking about, just as an example, the strategic plan that the board is working on that. But it's in conjunction with the superintendent's office, that there's this relationship that's in place that's gonna contribute to the success of the district. So I mean, plugging all these things in and, I just don't think there's been a real good job done with telling the community that we're here and we're taking care of business for them.
Gotcha.
So,
Excellent points, and I'll make note of that. I think it's true. You need to find out where these connections are and that they're positive. That if the community knows the school board members are doing their job and they're communicating with the superintendent, it all filters down from there. So great suggestions. I'll make note of that.
thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So that was a lot of information. And what I hope you heard and take away from tonight is the consistency in which the presentations provided to the information. It's very clear there's an alignment that we have established in our school district, with what we're doing and how we're trying to do it. I think you can see that there's a professionalism that's taking place with how we are trying to make sure we're putting all of our staff in a position to be successful, which ultimately means our students are going to be successful. So from tonight, we have the foundation in place. You can see that we've established that. There's some other areas that we need to still address in this upcoming year. I think where we're at now is a launch point from you as a community member, board member, talking with your neighbors you can say where we are right now. And we have a very solid foundation where we are academically. We certainly have a high percentage of students participating. And we are all focused in what we're doing in our work, not only across grade levels, it's in the building, but also vertical. And we're starting to see some positive impacts from that. So be proud of that. It's been a lot to be able to do in the short time that we've done it. So keep this document. Please print it off, put it wherever you need it to continue to use your reference for you. This is just something that'll be a launch point for us for now the next year, so that you see what our goals are going forward. And I want to thank you for supporting us. Without your support to be able to get the professional development and to do some of the things that we've needed to do with looking at the academics, to the statistical point of view, to bringing in consultants, you've freed us up to be able to do that. And without that, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you for supporting us and what we're bringing to you for information. It's very much appreciated.
I think it's important, if I might, to let you know, folks that were here tonight, that this was very informative, it's very professional. I appreciate personally, I appreciate all the effort that went into this. Having this laid out over a period of time to show changes, improvements, updates throughout the year, I think is very significant. It gives us a real clear picture of where we're at and where we need to be going and how we should be looking to get there. And I think a lot of those questions are answered tonight. So thank you. It's much appreciated.
Summing up intentionality. So, thank you. All right, moving on. Going into next year now. So one of the things the board asked for a year ago was to have an outline of what topics that we would present and be the focal point. So what I did was look at what our topics were this past year, pretty much mirrored them going into this upcoming year, and added a couple other items in there that we didn't have before. And this is to be the template that we'll use. I think the critical part to look at is what we're trying to do is to make sure during the year, every department is coming back to the board with some type of an update for you. And then still keeping in mind, we are modifying when we're doing our presentations for the mid-year and the end of the year. I've got to confirm mid-year is still good, right, with the data that we're going to be bringing. So that might need to shift, but that might be the one that'll move. But the whole key is every department is going to be bringing you some kind of an update. We're still doing the midpoint and the end of year reviews. It's a working document. So as we know, and Kevin's done this very diligently after the end of each board meeting, he asks, is there anything else that we'd like for topics? And that's when we can always look to adjust or shift, modify any of these as well. So here's the tentative plan for this upcoming year. Okay. Two more items that I have, and I'll need Christy to support me. I'll start with the Press 109, at least what I went through. If you want, please add into it. Press 109, from when I've read it, the main focus is really about anaphylaxis processes, which deals with allergic reactions. A lot of that was legislative updates. So what we did have was our nurses go through what our policy was in regards to anaphylaxis and what our procedures were. And we are in a line with our current practices for us at District 75 in our buildings. So when it comes to doing any modifications, we can accept as is. And that's the big takeaway for me with this report. This was Press 109. There's a lot more of the legislative updates that did do some of the tweaks, but substantially, I wouldn't, Christy, you can confirm with me or not, but nothing's changing our policies to speak of.
This is definitely a much more tame one compared to 108 because 108 was nuts. And that's good that they did a thorough review on that one, and it took a lot of work, but this one's a little easier to go through. But I did note in the questions ahead of time, and this is our first reading, so everyone is encouraged to go through it. I know in the packet was the actual press document, which does summarize when I did the webinar where they talked about it through the IASB. you know, they try to break everything down into bundles. So as Dr. Meyer said, there's the anaphylaxis bundle, the healthcare right of conscience act bundle, you know, it's a miscellaneous, and then the 5-year review. We, as a board, are already doing our own annual review by going through a section of our policy each time. However, as part of the press, they do have them designated different ones to go on a 5-year review. So when we're going through this particular, because we're not adopting it, this is not on the agenda for today to adopt it, this is the first read through, and hopefully by the next time we'll have a second read through and then we can adopt and be able to make any changes. There are a few questions that we'll have to answer and make a decision on, and I know I sort of initiated some of the contacts, and I'll do a deeper dive into that and work with Dr. Myers so that I can make sure we have the answers, so that I can make sure we're all on the same page before we vote the next time with what those specific, you know, questions are, because you got to make sure that we don't say yes in one area if that's not part of our policy in another area. We have to make sure it's all internally consistent. So I think this one's pretty manageable, but I didn't have any other, you know, big details about it. It was just sort of figuring out, because I know a few years ago was they didn't used to have unassigned EpiPens basically in the nurse's office that could be used in emergencies. Now they do if we've adopted it and all. So it's just a matter of me trying to understand and making sure that like Dr. Meyer said, that we're doing whatever our policy says and that we're being consistent, or that we need to adopt, change, or dictate that. So.
The next one, Kristen, hand up to, so our equity policy. First reading is tonight.
Right, so we, Eric had, Freddie, Eric and I at our last meeting, 2 meetings ago, the last policy equity committee meeting that we had gone through as a final read through with the few of the community members that were able to attend that particular one. And we did a deep dive into this. And so what we did put through in this, but what we did put through in this policy that's up there and we'll put in the packet too, is showing you, we have proposed looking at our policy numbers, calling this 725. This is obviously one that we're writing and putting in. There's no right or wrong place for us to put it, but it seemed to make sense to us to put it in the same section, which dealt with the, trying to remember the name of it so that I use the right term, but the educational equity policy. I think there was already an educational equity policy. And because we were talking about, and it had decided as our own committee, that we wanted to mirror some of the language without being duplicative. And we wanted to make sure that this was definitely focused on racial and ethnic equity rather than getting lost in making it in a totally different part or anything else. So we did want to mirror and make sure that we weren't just repeating and doing that. So that was the suggestion that, you know, that we had to put that in so that it was in the same section with the student services section. And we took out the word policy only because all of the other policies don't have policy as part of their titles. It didn't make sense. Clearly, if it's in the policy manual, it is policy. We don't need to call it as such. So we took that off as a suggestion. And then going through the document itself, this, as a reminder, this was based on the one that we looked at a number of different samples of different policies and equity statements, because some districts haven't done this at all. Some have chosen to do just a statement to demonstrate, you know, what they want to convey without actually putting it as part of their policies. We had made a commitment based on the decisions of the board at the time to make it a policy and not just to do a resolution, was one of the other, what some other districts have done. So we did survey and looked through and as a committee with our community and staff members that were part of that, narrowed down the one that we wanted to really focus on, that we felt best worked for us. As it turns out, the one that everybody voted on without us actually saying where it came from was modeling it after District 120's policy. So I think that is good in a lot of aspects, in that we are a shared services, with the districts being aligned. And I think that that was a good ending point that we ended up with, even if it wasn't the intended starting point. But I think that that helps make it internally consistent. But we did want to make sure that District 75, we were taking a fresh look at it and taking into account our staff members and parents and board members who are part of it, not just merely mirroring what the high school did, because we do have different populations of children and that we serve, and not everything is the same, for both. So we did find that some of the language we didn't find fit or didn't make sense, or what we really thought we wanted to convey. So we shortened up some of the beginning parts and the preamble places rather than making it so wordy. We also noticed we liked the idea of the glossary that's at the end, and not everyone did, but we did find that the definitions we felt were helpful, because if we were going to use the language, we wanted to make sure we were all using and conveying the same meaning with those definitions. We did add some, so you'll see the ones that are in yellow are ones that do not appear in the other draft of the
Scroll down
policy.
on it.
At the end. So although you can see the highlights that we made from the previous drafts and some of the language that we changed just to make it fit a little bit more with what we were trying to convey. We shortened up some of the pieces and we took out some pieces. We liked the idea, in particular with this entire policy itself. We liked the idea that there was a commitment section that as a community and as a board, we are putting forth a commitment for various criteria that what we wanted to do. And then also the responsibility component, which also talks about what we're going to do to implement it. So, and the responsibility section is broken down into what the district's Board of Education is going to do and what the superintendent is going to do in order to meet that commitment that we said up above. So I would just ask everyone to take, a deep look at it. I know we had a couple of staff members that were very helpful in helping us to wordsmith this, especially when some of us had just been looking at it for too long. It was nice to have fresh eyes that were committed to going through that. So they helped us a lot with that. And then we, like I said, at the end, the definitions, we did add some definitions that we felt were needed because the words were used throughout the other sections, but weren't defined. So we wanted to make it consistent. So I just ask, this is also not up for voting on tonight or adoption. This is the first reading. So everyone feel free to take a look at that. And then I do want to have everyone just send them to me. If you have any specific comments or changes that you'd like to do, because we can't have a group email with all of us, that would violate the Open Meetings Act. So if you can forward any comments or changes to this policy, if you have certain words that you don't like or you want to change, let me know. And that way I can then compile that before the next meeting and get that out to everybody so that hopefully we can have one that we can put on the agenda to adopt at the next meeting. Or maybe the following one, since the next meeting is, we'll see.
Yeah, we can do either.
Whenever we
Maybe
do
August.
the second reading and adoption.
Mark?
And just wanted to say, with all that goes on in the middle school surrounding gender identity, race, ethnicity, religion, thank you for taking the time to make a stand about what we believe is a school. It takes courage, as Christy said, not everybody's doing this. And so I just want to say thanks. And I know it's only the first reading, but I appreciate because we all learn something about ourselves and each other when we go through stuff like this. So I just want to say thank you.
And you bring up a good point that I forgot to mention, so this is a good opportunity. With that, we talked about, because it's the educational equity policy that's a couple in that section 7. That's I want to say it's 710. I don't have it in front of me, so don't quote me on that, but right around there, it has a lot like an overarching definition that lists off lots of things that it mentions gender diversity and some other things. And there was some discussion on whether or not, do we really need a racial and ethnic diversity policy, because we already have this. We felt as a committee that it was important to still recognize it and keep that separate. And one of the things we did talk about was going through, because in the first one, it does talk about gender and it talks about that. We talked about whether or not that should be included here, but we felt that that may deserve its own policy that we certainly are interested in looking at down the road. But we didn't feel like it made sense to dump it into this particular one, because we had a committee that was looking at this and we spent the last year going through that and doing that. But we thought that is a valid comment and question, because it also deserves discussion, but it didn't deserve just to be thrown in as an afterthought within this one. So this one does not address specifically that, but you do bring up a good point, and we do not mean to convey that that's not important by this particular policy, but that may be something we want to explore in the next year or next cycle of doing that, and whether or not we add and flesh out further that area as a policy within probably that same section, like we said. So thank you for highlighting that, because I forgot to mention that.
It was meant as
Oh,
a
no, no,
thing,
no.
because as Chief, or as Ray said earlier, when Peter was, it starts with you guys, and that gives us direction. So our confidence to then move forward with other things we're working on, rather than MG saying it one way, Sandberg saying it another way, Ryan saying it a different way through dual language. So thank you.
Thank you.
So if we're moving on, the one thing I'd suggest, just knowing it's approximately 9:40, be mindful of time. One thing I'd mentioned, knowing the meeting will be longer, is for you as a board, we have the constant topics regards to board policy updates, number 4, or even school boarding part with going over the code of conduct. One mindful of time, I'd offer to the board, are those things that you'd want to maybe push off until another meeting, because we went through some policies and stuff, so we can get through the rest of the board, and we can still do closed session.
I would suggest, rather than having us go through each one, I think this particular section is a rather small one, but rather than having us dive through and go through and summarize each one to talk to one another, I think that these are less, especially since they're fiscal and business. I know we're supposed to get back to some of these, in particular with the finance committee, I think had gone through and taken a deep dive in that, and we're going to get back to that another time. So I don't know that we need to take all the time to go into all of these, because we're going to hear more, and I know Freddie was part of that and he's not here tonight anyway. So I would like to probably push off. I encourage everyone to still, obviously, as part of your review of the packet and making ourselves all knowledgeable of our policies, to review it, but I don't personally think we need to go through in depth tonight, especially given the time and the length, and the fact that I think Freddie should be here to go through that, since he and his finance committee went through that a little bit heavier.
So here's Kevin.
Okay, we've already done board policy. You don't have anything else, right?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Next up is finance advisory.
Our next meeting will be, I believe it's July 11th or somewhere around there too. And at that time, we're going to go through policies. We're going to go through some different projections for capital improvements and bonding options.
Oh, geez.
Okay. Excellent. Next one is school boarding. Do you have anything we want to talk about that?
So you had added in your manila folders during the past week and a half roughly. Members of the admin team had the opportunity to be able to meet with Emily to go through updates and any information that we had for handed out. I was requested that we also make sure we share it with everybody else. So those are in your package for you.
Yeah, that was me. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. Okay, next up is representative updates. Steam Foundation.
actively looking for more board members for the STEAM Foundation. They are doing, now thinking about it, I don't know that I've seen any additional updates, but I believe tomorrow night is a Zoom meeting that's sort of open to people that might be interested in doing it, so that we can have some of the board members present to talk about it, because we have a number of people who either have moved or are getting ready to retire from the board. And so we need some new blood for people that want to get involved and do that. We do a lot of really fun, we're the STEAM Foundation, but I've been part of it even before I was the committee representative. They do a lot of really good fundraisers that haven't been as big in the last couple of years, but we did do a couple this year, and we're hoping to, bring that back in full force next year. Night of the races and pizza throwdown and things like that. So they are hoping to do those next year. I know that they worked with the admin and the buildings principals in order to make sure that our fundraisers didn't overlap with all the other things, to try to do alignment of all the dates and the calendars, which I think is really important for families. And I applaud our district's efforts to do that among the 2 districts and the buildings. And so the STEAM Foundation was trying to be part of that, so that we didn't schedule a big fundraiser the same night as conferences or something. So that's happened. I know that the STEAM camps have been going on this summer, and I know my son participated in one and loved it. I know lots of other people are enjoying that and doing that. So that's a really tangible benefit, especially with scholarships and stuff that have been done, that can be seen of what we're doing with the money that gets raised at the fundraisers. So if you know of anyone that may be wanting to participate, it's tomorrow night on Zoom, let me know and I can pass out the information. I know that they've put it out in a couple of different places too on social media. So but if you know of anyone, reach out to me and I'm happy to pass that along.
Okay, thank you. Eric, Cedal?
Yeah, I don't have a new update for us this week. I attended the last board meeting on June 2nd, but there was not a full quorum that showed up, so we had to reschedule it for June 29th. And at that meeting, we'll be going over the budget for next school year.
Okay, thank you. Community outreach. Ray, do you have anything?
No.
Okay. And equity committee, I guess the big one is we have the equity policy, so
We put it out there.
that's sort of self-explanatory.
Comment as well.
Thank you. Okay, next up is the consent agenda. Does anyone have anything on the consent agenda that they would like removed so that we could vote on separately? All right, hearing none, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second,
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly,
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Bitzky.
Aye.
Billy's here.
Aye.
Carl. Aye. Rose. Gallegos is absent.
Okay, next up is the board action items. The first one is the fiscal year 23 budget for adoption and resolutions. Second, moved by Mr. Rose, second by me. Secretary, please call the roll.
Rose.
Aye.
Holly.
Aye.
Carl.
Aye.
Gallegos is absent. Fingerhut, aye. Billy's here.
Aye.
Bitzky.
Move that the Board of Education, Mundelein Elementary District 35 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the shared services positions as presented.
Second,
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Billy's here.
Aye.
Bitzky.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Carl.
Aye.
Gallegos is absent.
I move the Board of Education of District 75 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the consolidated district plan for the fiscal year 22-23 school year as presented. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Billy's here.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Carl.
Aye.
Bitzky.
Aye.
Gallegos is absent. Fingerhut, aye.
I move that the Board of Education of District 75 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the 22-23 school calendar year as presented. Second. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Bitzky.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Gallegos absent. Billy's here.
Aye.
Carl.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Okay, I move that the Board of Education adjourn and enter into executive session in order to discuss employment compensation of specific employees of the public body and discussion of minutes by meetings lawfully closed under the Open Meetings Act. Second. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Bitzky.
Aye.
Carl. Aye. Rose.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye. Pelletier.
Aye.
Gallegos absent. 9:39.
Thank you all again for your presentation.
Ready to go.
Okay, all right, we are back in session, Mundelein Elementary School District 75 board meeting. It is 10:12 on Tuesday, June 21st. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Here.
Rose.
Here.
Carl. Here. Hetzke. Here. Gallegos is absent. Fingerhut here. Pelletier.
Here.
I move the Board of Education on kind of recommendation of the administration, accept the fiscal year 23 administrator and ESP compensation recommendation.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Carl.
Aye.
Hetzke. Aye. Fingerhut aye. Pelletier.
Aye.
And Gallegos is absent.
I move that the Board of Education accept the executive session minutes for May 17, 2022.
Second.
Second, Mr. Hiskey, Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Hetzke.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Pelletier.
Aye.
Gallegos is absent. Fingerhut aye. Carl.
Aye.
Okay, President's prerogative.
We skipped one, the ESP compensation.
I did that one first.
I thought you did administrators first.
Administrator and ESP compensation says.
Oh, I have them as two action items on my roll call. That's the only reason that I say. I'm
We have them
just-
together on the agenda.
On the
Just
agenda,
saying
it's
for the-
it's- on the agenda, there's an and.
Okay,
So what did we vote on already?
the
Pick one.
administrator. We
Administrator,
already
all right,
did.
now we're gonna vote on the ESP one. Move the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the educational support personnel compensation increase for fiscal 23 as presented.
Second,
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Fingerhut aye. Gallegos absent. Pelletier.
Aye.
Hetzke.
Aye.
Carl.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Thank you, sorry. Keeping my notes here.
Okay, President's prerogative. All right, the first thing I always ask, does anyone have any agenda items they'd like to put on the agenda for July or probably more likely August at this point? Anything going on? No? Okay. Second of all, I'd like to draw your attention to the Zoom video analytics from July 21 to May 2022. We talked about, Emily, we talked about back in March or April, if we wanted to continue Zooming the meetings. And we were going to look at the numbers about how many people are actually seeing the meetings. It's very common for there to be nobody in the audience for these meetings. It's just way of life. I'm not really sure. Although, you know, from time to time, we do get lots of people here, depending on if there's a sensitive topic or something that people feel strongly about. But it doesn't seem like that we've had much in the way of views on YouTube as we have been streaming the meetings this past year. So anyone have strong feelings about whether or not we should continue to do this?
Did we even have anybody on there tonight at all?
No.
I think as Kevin talked about before, it costs us a little bit in terms of time for one of the IT guys to be here to run the equipment and everything.
Even with the views on YouTube, none of them are even over 10 minutes. You're just checking in for
Yeah.
one portion.
I think
of
to me,
it.
that's like that's the weirdest one. Is that even though, you know, in March, there were 28 people watching, they were only on for an average of 7 minutes, like an average of 8 minutes.
I
So,
think that's common though. I would guess if we were looking at it, that would be for the public comment section, or if they knew there was a big topic, they would tune in for like that part and then get off. I don't know.
yeah, maybe.
My opinion, only because we are trying still to engage the community, and that's a comment that we keep bringing up, and it's this. If that's one of our goals is to continue to engage the community, I understand there's a cost involved. I personally like it. I appreciated that last month when I was sick, I was able to still participate as a board member in the meeting. And if there was an important issue that came up, we can't predict when there are going to be important issues that really matter to people. And given that we are an elementary district, there are a lot of people with young families who can't always come and sit at a board meeting for 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever, even if a topic is important enough. I do know some people who do watch and do that when it's important. They may not watch the entire meeting, but they do watch. And even if they're not watching when it's live, there are people, like the meeting last July, 39 people went on YouTube and watched it. If we weren't recording it, there would be nothing on YouTube for them to even go back and see. And I know when there was an important issue that was important to a lot of people at the high school, they were surprised to find out that the high school no longer does the Zoom, and there were a lot of angry people about that. That doesn't affect us, but I think it's indicative of, if we're trying to engage the community, I worry that us shutting it down makes it look like we're trying to disengage from the community, even if there is only a small benefit, because again, what if, we don't know, what if? I mean, I just think that now that we have it in place, I get that it's a cost benefit analysis. I absolutely agree with that. I personally like it, but.
Anybody else have strong feelings? I could go either way, honestly.
Yeah.
As a parent, I've tuned into every meeting this whole year, whether it be for a little bit of time or the March when I was there for like well over 2 hours. I liked having the option.
I was gonna say, I think I agree with what Christie's saying. So we have the IT guy here at every meeting anyway, right?
Not anyway, no. I
Only
wouldn't be
because of
here
the
if we
Zoom,
didn't.
yeah.
We didn't make the meeting available via Zoom, you wouldn't be.
So the only reason he's here is for that.
Yes.
I just don't know if, when you look at what the cost is, if it's that significant in terms of what the potential loss to us would be in terms of the perception, not use the term damage, that it's gonna do to us. Because we can't be talking out of both sides of our mouth. That we want to be involved with the community, we want to engage the community, and then cut off one of the main links, or we meet once a month and have an opportunity for the community to engage with.
Do we need to have them here to record the meeting? To video it, where it's not out on Zoom necessarily, but it can be made available on YouTube, or for them to, I know there are a number of school boards that where they just tape the meeting and then it's available.
We could look at that as an option, yeah.
That way you're not necessarily cutting your nose off,
Right.
but you are making.
I would be okay with that.
Lose the interaction.
The only problem
Right.
is it would eliminate them from, that means in order to be a part of public comment, you have to physically be in the building, which again,
Right.
is a different, and I understand completely that the high school has a different population. I mean, obviously at the high school level, they already have built-in babysitters. And if young kids is an issue in their family, they have someone they can draw on if they're not in 10 activities like mine. But we have to, that is a difference between our
True.
population than up there. I would find that as a happy medium, as a compromise, and I think that is something. I don't know, given the amounts of money that we do talk about, and as Kevin pointed out tonight, $250,000 here, whatever, I mean, that is a big number. I don't know what the cost is in order to help weigh that analysis, and I think that maybe that's an important factor that we could look at before we totally axe it and decide that, because I think that that's an analysis we need to have, or information we need to have in order to make that decision, that perhaps we can discuss in full at our strategic planning meeting next month.
Yeah, I like you, Kevin. I could go either way.
Do you have anything?
I could go either way.
We have made a strong push to be connected to the community, and this is a great way to do that. We have one example here of somebody that tuned in every day or every month for it. But I also understand the financial burden as well. I think it would help if we knew what that was, and, I don't know if we can get creative with it too and say, we're gonna offer it, but if, there's nobody signed on at the start of it, then
shut it off.
shut it off. But if, he's already here, I don't know if it's.
Well, it's an hourly, my understanding from before, it might be overtime when they're here, so it's, if we cut them off at the beginning as opposed to at the end, I would imagine that still is a cost savings if that's a factor, but I just think it would be helpful, I think, to have the amounts to know what the cost has been and.
I can help. So the thing I would ask us, or you as a board to consider, I'd move away from the cost analysis piece. Because when you get down to it, it's not a lot. We said before, it's roughly $1,500, I think, for the year. I'm ballparking here, so it's time and a half. And looking at contracts, so we're averaging between 2.5, 3 hours for a meeting. So you're talking roughly 36 hours over the year. So looking at time and a half, you're talking it's just over $1,400. The bigger discussion, I think, from like a staffing point of it is taking usually that person's now going in later. And to me, it's that balance that we talked about earlier for that individual going back into the work the next day. They do try to rotate, but eventually with the tech stuff going around, to me, some of that's part of this discussion also. That's for the employee side. So working it through, can we still do it? Yes. I think the other part with, when I look at the data and you talk about who's attending, I think the question comes, we want to be reaching out to our community. I think all of us agree on that. But we also see the key point then is our citizens that are attending. We had 0 tonight, we had 0 last month. You take away the November date, which was when we first started talking about the plans at our facility planning at MG. And then the last one in July, which we had 6, that was what we're finally saying, what we're doing, masking or not, was coming back to school. You're talking about, we've had pretty much 3 or less community members participate, and they are pretty consistent with who they are. So that to me is, we want to be good stewards, you want to be good stewards to get the communication out. Does that meet that standard? Because that's my concern that I have with it.
If I could bring one more perspective, like Emily said, though, if she participated by watching on Zoom, and she was one of those people. When we opened it up and said we need more board members, she was one that stepped up and did it and had knowledge because she'd done that. The year before I ran for board, I attended every board meeting, and that was when they were twice a month. And that was really difficult with a toddler at home and whatever, but I did it because I wanted to understand what was going on. And if I was gonna start and get involved and run, I wanted to know what it was about. We're heading into an election year. I don't know how many people we want to solicit to get out there. And if we want, I mean, from my perspective in that regard, 1 or 2, that's all it might take to be on there, to do that work, to get quality people who really understand what the job is, to be involved. That's only one example. It's not just about the board, but I think that that is an important piece. And if we are going to be doing more town halls or, you know, whatever things we may come up with as far as trying to engage the community, this gives us an avenue, if we have it open, to then point people and say, hey, you can come to a board meeting or you can tune in. If we shut it down, and again, I'm not saying we have to do this forever. I'm just saying if we have the technology and it's not too cost prohibitive right now, especially since we hope everything is, you know, getting to an end, and we also hope that last year and we still had some issues. I hate to see us cut our nose off to spite our face when we haven't done the strategic planning to figure out exactly how we want to engage the community. If it's not a big outlay, and I'm not minimizing the employee piece of it, but I mean, all of us have to get up and go to work the next day too, but that's a job we signed up for, which is different than what they did, and I get that. But I think that it's an important, even if we can only engage 1 or 2 people, I still think that it's a valid tool that I would like to offer. And, you know, if the numbers all go down to 0 and over, then maybe we do, you know, change it down the road. But if the technology exists now and we're all familiar with using it, parents included, I think it's a benefit.
You know, another thing to follow up with on that. What right now have we put out into the community that makes them interested and want to watch what the board is doing or participate in what the board is doing? Because right now, there's nothing. And if we start interacting with the community and developing, you know, different committee format and these interactions, there may be more interest in the community where they are going to want to start to engage with us. I mean, even if I just think it's conflicting with what we're saying we want to do. We want to interact with the community, but we're going to turn you off so you can't see what we're doing at the meeting.
Right.
You know, if you give people a reason to criticize, they're going to criticize. And
They're gonna
it's
do
like,
it, but that's okay.
Emily,
That's part of the community engagement too.
Can I ask you, why did you watch online instead of coming here?
Mostly because childcare.
And then Anna, may I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
What do you do in terms of your work time to be at the board meetings?
What do you mean? Like, give me a little bit
Well,
more.
because Kevin talked about how maybe the IT guy might go in late tomorrow morning. Like, what do you do in terms of your work time to do the board meetings?
Well, I still have to come in at my regular time, right?
Okay.
Because so many factors come in after, like what has to be done for today, like whatever is agreed to.
Okay.
have to go on.
So then this is just like extra hours in your work week that you get paid overtime for?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I was just curious from Kevin was talking about from the personal point of view. I was just curious.
It's quite a bit that goes into it, so.
Right, right.
And he does a portion of it. I have to manage the other portion of it. So I can't do it all. Yes, there has to be some.
Right, of
assistance
course,
somewhere
of course.
along the line.
Okay.
We're
Right.
not looking to add to your plate. That's not the point.
So I would say that let's continue with that. And then we'll sort of see where it goes. Maybe, the next mid-year review we do of teaching and learning, maybe we do a review of this again and just take a look at it. The only thing I will say is that we definitely have to try to make a point of not going past like 11 o'clock because we don't want to have to pay double overtime to the IT guy that's here. That was a joke. So, okay.
Kevin, I think one of the things that I'm talking to Dan Crow was also improving the audio equipment that we use. Right now, we have a very simple piece of equipment that only does a small piece of what we currently need. It's an investment that also, at some given point.
What he was talking about is we wanted to maintain the video capacity. The one complaint that does happen with viewers is it gets hard to hear because it's projected that owl. They would want to get speakers put on the tables, microphones, stuff like that, so that we would be able to, you as board members would be able to project better when you're talking.
I can't imagine I'm hard to hear, but that's just. Okay, anything else for Parsons Prerogative? I don't have anything else. I'm wearing a mask tonight because this is my last day of basking for COVID. I had COVID last week, so. It's been an adventure. It's been spent a lot of time in isolation at home, so it's nice to be around people. It's a really nice change.
And we're happy to have you.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I haven't been here for a while because of work and this stuff too, so.
And I just wanted to point out, I noticed that we also do all have a copy of the para evaluation handbook that we talked about in the last couple of times. This was part of what, and I know you haven't been at all of this, so at some of the meetings where we discussed this. This was a combined effort among Sarah and the union members and the staff who put this together, which allowed a lot of this language that was previously in the old contract to be pulled out and expanded upon and agreed upon between all of them to be put in a living document that's this. And we had asked that we also all be provided a copy so that we were aware of what the performance evaluation reform act was. So just following up, it's here, it's all here. This is what we had talked about before. And
Okay,
it's yours.
that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Phil, Sarah. Okay,
You guys all have those cooler bags.
Yeah.
Those are gifts to you for this past year. They're not in school colors or anything. Purpose. It's meant for you to be able to go hang out. Hopefully you have some beverages, adult beverages, and enjoy yourselves and relax.
Gracias.
thank you. All right, no business further before the board. I move that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Fair enough.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.